Right, I'm back with Dr. Longo. People absolutely loved our first podcast. There's a few things they're critical of, like Columbus being Jewish. We'll get into that. But since I mentioned Jewish, let's start out with the banger. Everyone keeps asking and arguing over and fighting over. Is Jesus Jewish or was he Jewish? Is, I guess.
Right. So if we had to just pick no or yes, I'd say no. That's the easy answer.
Mhm.
It's really a lot of trickery that goes on with the terms, the terminology. There's a lot of inheritance that's kind of being claimed.
Mhm.
There's almost like a inheritance dispute after a loved one's passed. We could almost look at it
Mhm.
like that.
Charlie
And
Kirk, we're fighting over him now.
maybe some descendants of a very rich father or grandfather are trying to like name members of their family after the deceased in order to like say, oh no, look how dedicated we are to that side. We have this name in our family, it's always been there. But if we really unpack the term Jewish, uh Jesus was not Jewish, not remotely. So in some English Bibles you see the word Jew, and that's misleading for people. So we really have to start kind of all the way at the top or at the beginning
Mhm.
of the family tree here in order to understand the terms. So there's Hebrew. Okay, before the Hebrew identity, we don't really have this collective identity. Um, we do have Shem. So there's Noah and his three sons. Shem is one of them, and that's where we get the word Semitic. So maybe that's the first term that we can check off. Was Jesus Semitic? Yes. So he qualifies as Semitic, but so do so many other people.
Yeah,
Many,
Palestinians.
many, many nations. Yeah. So Semitic, Jesus was Semitic. Then a little farther down, we get Abraham. Abraham and one of his descendants or one of his ancestors, Eber, from the phonetic thread in their name, Eber and Abra,
Mhm.
Abram, later Abraham. From that Eber and Abra, right? Little abracadabra. Really, it's connected to that a little bit. You then get Hebrew. So Hebrew is kind of like a family name, almost a combination between Eber and Abram. Those are the Hebrews. The Hebrews were not 12 tribes, they weren't Jews. So you'll often hear rabbis saying Abraham was a Jew, Moses was a Jew. That's not true. We can sort this out. And it's very important we sort this out. Um, you look at Abraham and the Hebrews, circumcision comes in there.
Mhm.
So if you look at that as a kind of a criteria for Jewishness, yes, those people were circumcised according to how the Old Testament's written,
Mhm.
but they weren't Jewish. They weren't Jewish at all. Then further on down the line, okay, we get to the sons of Jacob,
Mhm.
the tribes of Israel. 12, 14, 13 sometimes, but 12 more or less is kind of the
Mhm.
ideal. What God kind of envisions is nice, neat 12. Those are the Israelites. There's tribe of Dan, Levi, Benjamin, Reuben, and Judah. So Judah is the origin of the term Jewish. So
Okay.
of these 12 tribes, this is, you know, more towards this time, this is where you
Mhm.
get towards like the Exodus. Moses is leading these 12 tribes. Here's another important distinction to make. Moses was not Jewish. He was not
Sure.
even a Judahite. Moses was a Levite. So of these 12 tribes, they're being led by a Levite at the moment.
So they weren't being
That's
led, so it was Jews, but they weren't being led by a Jew? Interesting.
yes. Well, there were, the Jews, they weren't even Jews back then. They were not Jewish. We have to get real
Mhm.
technical with the terms. They were Judahites from the
Jewish, okay.
tribe of Judah.
Okay, so
Ju-
Jews didn't even exist.
Jew didn't exist. Judean didn't exist. So Jewish is kind of a cultural identity.
Mhm.
Judean was a political or geographic identity. Judahite was a bloodline. So Judahite went by blood alone, at least at
Yeah.
first. Not to say there weren't adoptions and, they mingled with the people around them a
Yeah.
little bit, but there was a large amount of like racism and blood purity, consciousness of keeping the blood pure back then. And the Judahites were a family, a bloodline. Um, Moving on past Moses, then Hebrew identity, Israelite identity. It's important we make this distinction too, because in tackling the question, was Jesus Jewish? We're tackling the question of Zionism. Is
Yeah.
there such a thing as geographic Jewishness?
Mm.
Do the Jewish people deserve a geographic
Yeah.
location? If we're paying attention to this and the distinctions between the terms, we're going to see it's you know easily a no. So
Yeah. That's no brainer.
moving down the line, the Israelites, then we get to um, so basically originally Israel was a covenant, right? So that's a term we kind
Mhm.
of skipped over to. Israel is a covenant. Jacob's renamed or nicknamed Israel. It means one who struggles with God. Some people like to say one who wrestles with God,
Mhm.
one who, it's interpreted different ways. So I don't want anyone to get hung up on what Israel
Yeah.
means. There's other people, a more mystical approach. People point to Isis, Ra, and El, right? This kind of
Mhm.
people try and connect the culture to the other Semitic faiths and Egyptian mythology and stuff. But don't get hung up on that. Moving past that. Also, remember we joked about jujitsu and
Yeah.
so there is a little something there with
I'm a master of
Israel.
jujitsu,
Israel being like wrestling, and then jujitsu. These other
and
there's
I'm
another.
Jacob, my name. So
Well,
maybe I'm part
there
of
you
the
go.
lost tribe.
Yeah. And so basically, when we get to the 12 tribes, then there starts to become a new hierarchy because the Hebrew identity, the Israelite identity, it started as bloodlines. It started as a
Mhm.
family. One man's family was chosen to rise above the rest.
Mhm.
Now, not to be like a snowflake, but that doesn't sound very fair, right? It's a little
No.
exclusive, but it was a plan and a mission by God to raise up one family to be an example to all the rest, to instill his grand plan, one seed at a time. He likes to see people sign on willingly.
Mhm.
God could snap his fingers and get what he wants, but he likes to see people willingly worship him. And Abraham played a big role in people confuse it, but Abraham symbolizes a departure from child sacrifice. Many pagan cultures
Mhm.
around that area were fully engaged in child sacrifice. So Abraham, even though people think, oh, he's about to sacrifice his kid.
Yeah.
There's different interpretations on that, but what it really symbolizes is a departure from child sacrifice that many nations were engaged in. It also sets the stage in almost an allegorical or a transcendental sense. It sets the stage. It sets a precedent and like a divine structure for the coming of Jesus as well. People interpret that as like a premonition or a pointing towards another son that would be sacrificed in a
Yeah.
sense. So Abraham's important, and that role that family has is very important. So we shouldn't get jealous or saying, oh, that's racist, it's exclusive. But starting out as a family or a bloodline,
Mhm.
then Israel, or it starts out as a covenant bloodline, then it starts moving into a um, more of a geographic thing. So now they have to
Mhm.
get to the promised land, right? There's this mission to go to Canaan, and settle the promised land. And basically, what this was, we can interpret this as a new plan, a new mission a reinterpretation of this covenant, where instead of just being a bloodline, which is pretty exclusive,
Yeah.
but it had its purpose, then it switches to more of a geographic uh,
Mm.
identity, meaning salvation, if we can use that term loosely, had less to do with who your parents were and had more to do with if you can get to the right spot, if you can get to this
Mhm.
blessed place.
Which is kinda like the Jerusalem area or
Yep,
yeah.
yep.
They've been
Modern
so
day
obsessed with that area for
Palestine, Israel,
hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's so confusing.
Jerusalem. And
Mhm.
so basically, after that, um, the the criteria or the mission changes. We have to get somewhere that's a geographic place, and this was like the second evolution of what God was expecting from these people. And it's the
Mhm.
new identity of these people. Instead of just being a tight bloodline, it's more, if you're a part of this mission, if you can get to that holy land, you're going to be loosely with the blessed, the saved, the
Mhm.
elect. So it's a little bit more inclusive. Okay,
Mhm.
when we get to Jesus's time, okay, because I know the question was about Jesus. There's a lot more that could
Yeah.
be said about the identities in between there, and how the different tribes had different roles and how they lived up to their expectations or didn't. But just to skip to Jesus's time, Jesus makes a clear message. The geographic Israel is no
Mhm.
longer important. Once that was achieved and once that mission was accomplished, geographic Israel is no longer the identity. It's no longer the qualifier.
So
It's no
no
longer,
Chri so Christians shouldn't look at that necessarily a holy land?
they
I
can,
think that's a little
okay,
complex.
they can, but what it really means is the Judahites were no longer called upon to steward this land. Okay, they're no longer the boss, the people in charge. So going back to the question, was Jesus Jewish? Jesus was descended from the tribe of Judah, from the line of Judah. He was actually very pure blooded. Now, since the tribe of Judah was selected to be like the kings, the magistrates, the rulers, judges in many cases, the leadership positions, that was their occupation, that was their blessing, their task. The tribe of Judah would
Mhm.
become the kings and the judges and rulers. So they are attached to this land by name eventually,
Mhm.
and we get two kingdoms in this area. Eventually, there's the kingdom of Israel, and then there is the kingdom of Judah or Judea.
Mhm.
So once this geographic Judea is established, Judahite stops becoming very important, and now it's more of a political term. Anyone who's kind of in that area can choose to be a Jew or can be labeled a Jew by the Romans or whoever else just because they live
Mhm.
in Judea. So Jesus was a Judahite.
Mhm.
He did at times, spend much of his life in the kingdom of Judea, but we also need to distinguish that from Jewish. So
Mhm.
Jewish is everything that comes after that. People who were not fully Semitic but may have ended up there could be labeled Jewish. You know,
Yeah,
uh, emphasis on the ish. It's like kind of, close enough.
kind of.
Like you're American-ish,
Yeah,
Christian-ish. Um,
yes, we have a lot of that.
so, and just to really demonstrate this, who's King Herod? Who are there was multiple Herods, King Herods, but Herod, from his family, we get the term Herodian Jew.
Mhm.
So you'll hear. I'm sure you've heard maybe some of your Muslim or like black supremacist friends maybe use the term like Edomite.
Yeah,
Edomite. So Edom
I
was
have some
another.
weird friends, my black supremacists, my white supremacists. I definitely have a weird amount of guests.
Hey, me
Just
too.
have whatever.
Me too. I'm friends with a lot of these, like,
You can get
uh,
along with people that I really should
exactly.
not be. It's a
And
good skill to have.
not that I'm extreme in any way, but you'll notice sometimes, like, I'm sure you have, kind of the extreme on the right or the extreme on the white
Yeah.
often has a lot in common and respects the extreme on.
Hey guys, I'm demonetized everywhere. So if you want to support me and the podcast, go to fightbackpodcast.com and you can buy some cool merch like the shirt I'm wearing now. Hey guys, I want to introduce you to one of our sponsors, Antelope Hill Publishing. Antelope Hill publishes books such as Culture of Critique by Dr. Kevin McDonald, who's someone I've interviewed on my show. He talks about the evolutionary strategy of the chosen people. So go to antelopehillpublishing.com and use promo code FIGHTBACK to support the podcast and get a discount. That's antelopehillpublishing.com and promo code FIGHTBACK.
The black,
Oh,
uh,
oh yeah, 100%.
more than people would expect.
No, like the black nationalists and white nationalists are like so similar. Like I think they could get together. Some of them actually like each other. You hang out with these guys, like, oh, you guys are preaching the exact same thing.
Well, people appreciate the honesty, you know. Uh,
Exactly.
but basically, if you've heard that term Edomite,
Yeah.
I'm sure we're going to talk about the Khazar thing at some point. The
Yeah.
Khazar thing comes way, way further down the line. So when people say fake Jews,
Yeah.
Khazarian is, it's not a distraction. It's certainly a big piece of the
Yeah.
puzzle, but it comes way later on.
Yeah. That's
Jesus
what I
would have
figured.
had.
I looked into that and it's real, but people seem to over lean into it. I feel like that's kind of in my conclusion. But let's, after we wrap this, let's actually get into that and maybe some of the Sephardic, all those
Sure.
angles.
So Jesus was not, Jesus would not have known what Khazarian was. That's like 700 years later, but he would
Yeah.
have known what the Edomites were and the Herodians were. So if anyone wants to beg the question or ask the question, what was Jesus Jewish? We first need to understand what types of Jews were living
Mhm.
in and around Jerusalem back then. So Herod, who was a pretty much a Roman puppet, was a Jewish family that had been selected by the Romans
Mhm.
to rule in their favor, for them to keep the people kind of happy, more or less, because he's
Yeah.
Jewish on the outside, but his lifestyle was condemnable, by the Jews
Jewish
who held
law.
their beliefs in earnest. What Herod, or one of the Herods, was very, famous and beloved for, was that he funded and rebuilt the temple,
Mhm.
um, in Jerusalem, which is where they would perform their animal
The
sacrifices,
sacrifice.
thousands and thousands a day. And that's ultimately what Zionism is about, like we discussed last time. Is
You want to rebuild it.
why do they need to keep pushing into the Muslim territory to
Yeah.
recover the Al-Aqsa mosque and the various sacred locations that they can erect the temple back on, in order to kick off an animal sacrifice operation?
Yeah, you're friends with Cameron Waters. That's how I met you, right?
Yeah,
Cameron, who made this film about Jesus wanting to stalk this, is absolutely fascinating. What's this film called? It was Christ's
Christ.
Spirit, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah,
Yeah, we'll talk about vegetarianism. Let's wait a little bit. So a lot of the audience will probably be like, how dare you guys? But it's just so fascinating, that film he made of Jesus
yeah.
potentially being a vegetarian. I think he makes a great case for it.
Well, for anyone who doesn't know what a Herodian Jew was, is
Mhm.
they were some of the earliest batches of fake Jews. They were Roman citizens. They were other Semitic people. Sometimes they were they were just downright Canaanites who were passing as other things. The bulk of them were Edomites.
Mhm.
So that's where you hear that word Edom, come up
Yeah.
a lot. But Edomites, um, the kingdom of Judea being against the other tribes of Israel. That's another thing people don't talk about, is the kingdom of Judea and the kingdom of Israel would often war against each other. Okay. The kingdom
Interesting.
of Judea. So the fact that they call themselves the nation of Israel is very convenient, because if they're
Mhm.
calling themselves the nation of Judea, it would almost be like an acknowledgement that Judea and Israel were not always buddy
Uh,
buddy. Judea was often the antagonist and oppressor to the other
Interesting.
tribes of Israel. Um, you know, Along the line here, before Jesus's time, the lost tribes also come up. But basically, leading up to Jesus's time, everyone was questioning the validity of Herod's Jewishness and his family and the
Mhm.
uh, the nobility, the mainstream establishment, Judaism of the day had taken many new forms, and it had many outside influences. So that's another important distinction: is the political term Judean, uh, the tribe of Judah, and Jewish coming after that. There's also a very important parable that Jesus tells that really crushes Zionism. For
Mhm.
any Christians who may still be on board with Zionism, they probably weren't paying attention when Jesus tells the parable of the vineyard owner or landowner who basically owns this great piece of land, rich, important landowner. He's so busy, he doesn't, he needs servants to reap the harvest on this land, and he needs them to watch the land and stay there for, what we can assume to be like a year or something, maybe
Yeah.
more. The landowner hires these workers. The workers work on the land, they have great conditions, and say, you know, wow, this is a great job. This place is
Mhm.
beautiful. We really have to work very little and we're getting blessed so much. But no one checks in on them. And basically, they have a whole year or an amount of time to do this work on their own, and they get lazy. They get, sometimes when you bless someone too much, you give them too much,
Yeah.
you give them a nice place to live, you give them these blessings, it goes to their head a little bit. And the landowner sends a messenger to go tell these workers, hey, just so you know, the harvest is coming and our deal still
Mhm.
stands. You're you're here living nice, but we're coming back for the harvest. That messenger is not received well. He's rejected. Okay.
Mhm.
They beat him up, he's not nice. The landowner says, what the hell? These people are, they're ruining it. He sends them another messenger. Okay. Uh they maim him.
Yeah.
They almost kill him. Um, I might be messing this up a little bit. There might be two or three, but the
Yeah.
last messenger, okay, the last messenger, he's out of messengers basically.
Mhm.
They're naming them or killing them. He says, "Well, now I need to send my son." The landowner says, "I must send my
Mhm.
son. Then they'll really know it's me." And then they can't say, "Oh, we thought that was someone else." Then they'll really know that the time's here. Sends the son. You can guess what happens. They kill the
Probably
son.
kill him. Yeah.
Jesus tells this parable to the Jews who are criticizing him, who would later be described as the
Mhm.
synagogue of Satan, and it
Yeah.
seems could not be farther from Jesus in his interpretation of the Torah, the Old Testament.
Mhm.
They're very opposed. So
Yeah.
just to highlight how different they are, it's not just theological. And by the way, that parable is a slam dunk on geographic Zionism. It's saying it is true that God selected the Judahites to be in charge of some things.
Mhm.
It is true that those Judahites then stewarded over the land, Canaan, Palestine, Israel, the kingdom of Judea. It's
Mhm.
true that they watched over that land and did their best to watch over it. It's also true that many people injected their way into that family, that
Mhm.
class of people, and corrupted it. Outside influence, the temple system becoming a bloody temple cult, as Jesus
Yeah.
was very.
Like
So basically,
extreme. It's real quick, the temple, the way Cameron explained it and went there, there was this insane amounts of sacrifice. They had like whole like canals where the blood could flow out. It wasn't just everyone knows it was like a banking thing, which I think was true
yeah,
as well with the usury, but the amount of sacrifice just sound horrific.
yeah, and so basically, that parable saying it's true God blessed this one tribe to have this one special role. It's also
Mhm.
true that they accomplished that, and then they ruled over this land, and then 1,000 or so years go by. That task is accomplished.
Mhm.
Okay, the lost tribes were spread out. There's multiple exiles and captivities. the Hebrews and Israelites are subject to, and the Judahites were the ones who were kind of selected to keep an eye on the land and do their best to rule over it while everything was falling apart. They did their best with that, and then, but only setting the stage for the true king to come back. Remember, they're the stewards of this place, and when Jesus comes back, he's rejected, just like that last son, that last messenger to the rebellious, workers on the land. That is the slam dunk. Jesus saying, you know, the blessings that were given to your nation. He follows up that parable, says,
Yeah.
the blessings that were given to your nation are now being passed on to those who are ready to inherit it, which
Mhm.
essentially is the Christians of the earth, the lost tribes of Israel, all those neo-pagans and the Viking people, all their
Mhm.
ancestors up in Europe, who has, quickly signed on for Christianity when they encountered it.
Yeah.
Not totally, but so basically there are some important distinctions there, as far as the bloodline leading up to Jesus, the political and geographic terms, Jewish, Judean, Judahite. But importantly, we need to make sure Jesus is actually warring against a group of Jews he believes to be his fake, who he
Yeah.
believes to be our fake, the Herodian Jews, the Edomites. Um, 700 years later, then the Khazar thing would pop
Yeah,
up.
that's some people try to call them
Uh,
the fake Jews. It's like, well, what's the real Jews versus fake Jews? And that's it ultimately
So,
who killed them.
so just again to really prove this point home, many of the Jews back then, most of the
Mhm.
Jews back then, even the Edomites, even the guys, the villains we don't like so
Mhm.
much, they basically had nothing to do with modern day Judaism. Their beliefs would have been extremely strange to
Mhm.
Jesus, even the Jews that Jesus was opposing, because modern Judaism actually takes form after the time of Jesus, not just because of their religious texts
Mhm.
that
Talmud
get
was written after, yeah.
standardized and yeah, written down later, but mainly because their whole interpretation of the Old Testament has to be shifted in order to deny or explain how the coming of Jesus, which matched every checkbox that
Mhm.
was the true Messiah, to explain how he was not the true Messiah. They had to reinterpret their own scriptures in a way that gaslit the rest of the world,
Yeah.
and validated themselves, validated their own rejection of Jesus. So that's where modern Judaism takes shape, uh, theologically, like spiritually.
Yeah.
But here's the real one, because this is important too. What about the blood and the flesh, the body, the anatomy of
Mhm.
Jesus? There's not a single there's not a single Jewish community or family on earth today that you could point to and say, yeah, Jesus looked like that. Not a single one. Modern Jews fit into three categories, like anthropologically or
Mhm.
culturally, uh, ethnically. There's Ashkenazi,
Mhm.
who emerge uh, only like 1,000 years ago. Really, I'm not even kidding.
Mhm.
It's like 1,500 years at the most. They emerge as a distinct ethnic group hundreds and hundreds of years, if not a full 1,000 years after the time of Jesus. So to compare Jesus to an Ashkenazi Jew is, it's number one, it's
It's
anachronistic.
impossible.
It's anachronistic. It's impossible. It's like comparing an apple to an orange.
Mhm.
It's like comparing an apple in the year uh, 2000 to an orange in the
Yeah.
year 4000.
Yeah.
It's an anachronistic. But the Ashkenazi Jews emerge as a distinct ethnic group hundreds, if not a full 1,000 years after
Mhm.
Jesus, and you cannot compare him to them at all. Another thing to notice is Ashkenazi Jews went through, obvious genetic bottlenecks, which means, some people believe that all Ashkenazi Jews trace back to a tight community
Yeah.
of only
I
300.
I think as some study says, or I don't know
Yeah.
if that's accurate, but that sounds a little
Now,
crazy.
that bottleneck happened so long after Jesus's time that
Mhm.
any sort of distinct looks that Jewish people might have today that may or
Mhm.
may not be due to how tight their gene pool is.
Mhm.
You know, inbreeding is another factor. That's not me
We've
coming
been
up
we've
with
been
that,
there.
or
Yeah.
that's not me saying, all Jews are inbred. It's a well-known fact that Ashkenazi Jews suffer from many
Mhm.
hereditary conditions because of it's a fact. Now,
Mhm.
all of that is so far removed from Jesus and his time in his community. We cannot call him Jewish by that standard at all. So that's Ashkenazi. We could
Yeah.
spend a lot of time proving that point further, but
That one
so far
seems pretty
removed.
easy, though. That seems like the most straightforward, easy one to prove.
Now, Sephardic as a distinct ethnic group emerges
Mhm.
in the Iberian Peninsula. So that's Spain and Portugal. Um,
Mhm.
and that's, later Roman times. So still couple hundred years after the time of Jesus, at the earliest, at the absolute earliest. Again, as far as really taking shape and taking form as their identity, they really come after Islamic times. So before that, there were Visigoths.
Mhm.
Way back, there were Celtic people living in the Iberian Peninsula in Spain. So before Islam came around, uh, you had pagans. There were white Christians in Spain with blonde hair and
Mhm.
light hair and stuff. Now the Jews went there, some of them from the Roman Empire. Okay, those were not
Mhm.
Sephardic, Ashkenazi, nothing. They went over there in some small numbers, considerable numbers, but pretty small. And over time, they started growing, and Sephardic identity really comes from the reaction to Islam. So remember, Jewish identity in many cases is a reaction to what's going on around them,
Mhm.
a rejection of what's going on around them. Uh, so again, things that Sephardic Jews do because they've come into contact with Islam, there's zero connection in those instances to what Moses' way of life was, what Jesus' life was, what Abraham. We have to be clear about this. So then, when you go to the Sephardic Jews, that distinct ethnic identity emerges hundreds of years after Jesus' time. After Islam comes, 711 is when Islam spread into the Iberian Peninsula. That's an easy number to remember. Every time you see 711, you can
Mhm.
think of the Muslims invading
Yeah.
Iberia. And remember, the Jews were accused of opening the
Opening
gates
opening the gates to let them in, yeah.
at
They're
Toledo.
all they're always falsely accused of things. I'm sure they're innocent.
Now, remember, the Jews then were very eager for the Muslims to come in. They saw them as
Mhm.
liberators. It's often said that Christianity, a lot of these neo pagans will say stuff
Mhm.
like Christianity was uh, a virus created by the Jews to destroy
Jewish side.
Europe and to destroy paganism. And oh, that great, glorious paganism. We'd all be living in harmony with nature if it wasn't for that Jewish Christianity that destroyed everything.
Mhm.
But basically, there's a little something to that, but they're looking in the wrong direction.
Mhm.
As much respect as I have for Islam and my Muslim, brothers and sisters, and
Mhm.
unfortunately, when you look at the early roots of Islam in the Quran, what we find is what people suspect about Christianity, about it being a Jewish Frankenstein.
Mhm.
What it really was Islam is a Jewish Frankenstein.
Really? I had someone
Is
tell me that's like last week. Yes.
Islam Islam was catalyzed, synthesized, and stabilized into a fighting force, like a warrior culture, basically a reinterpretation
Mhm.
of the Old Testament into uh, into a more hostile, destructive, element that could be kind
Mhm.
of sicked on their enemies. And uh, there were many Jews involved in the writing and drafting of the Quran because most of the Muslims could not read or write.
Really?
Muhammad could not read or write, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
And one of Muhammad's wives, one of his favorite wives, was
I
Jewish. He
I
had at
heard
least
that too.
one Jewish wife, some say two.
Mhm.
Um, one of his closest advisors was a converso. So that's like kind of an anachronistic term too, because that's like a
Crypto.
Spanish term. But he had converted from Judaism to Islam very, very early on in order to appease. So
Which is always suspect when someone does that.
Islam was a truce negotiated between the Jewish establishment in certain trading cities and trading
Mhm.
routes, Mecca, Medina, Mecca, other significant rich cities in over there in Arabia. It was a truce negotiated by Muhammad, okay,
Mm.
uh, between the rich city dwellers who were mostly Jews, the aristocracy, the rich, the elite,
Mm.
and the uh, lower classes, the peasantry, the pagan worshippers who would spin circles around this holy site there. Islam is essentially a truce, a fusion
Interesting.
that appeased both sides. Coming up with Islam allowed the outside peasantry to kind of mesh and kind of be on the same terms with the city dwelling elite that Muhammad was trying to trade with.
Yeah, well,
So
the Jews and Muslims, they lived, like, really peacefully for the vast majority of the time until Israel was created, so that makes sense. I'm sure some of the Muslim
yeah,
listeners might not like this, but that's very
well,
interesting.
the Jews thought very favorably of Islam until Christianity started whooping Islam's ass.
Mhm.
So when when Islam was conquering, hundreds of miles of Christian land, sometimes in a day, okay, in North
Yeah.
Africa, the Levant, the islands of the Mediterranean, southern Europe. When Islam was taking over all this land, the Jews were applauding. And just to go back to our story, in 7-Eleven, okay,
Mhm.
um, whenever you see a Muslim store owner or a Muslim
Mhm.
7-Eleven owner, you can think of this, right? It's kind of like this the it's kind of like the Simpsons with the
Yeah.
Muslim
Apu?
store owner, or
Yeah.
yeah, or Hindu or something.
It's a good way to remember it, though.
Yeah, it's a good way to remember it. So 7-Eleven is when the Muslims cross over into Iberia and start taking a lot over. The
Mhm.
Christians are not fully, they're not unified. They don't see it coming. They don't take it very seriously, and they're pushed back very quick. We talked about this last time, but basically, when that happened, this is what the Jews call the Jewish Golden Age in Spain. And Sephardic identity only really emerges as a distinct, culture after and as a response to this Arabic um, invasion, but also influence. So, Arabic puts a big emphasis on Sephardic Hebrew, the way they pronounce Hebrew. Their names for so many things are straight from Arabic. And then also, um, they are blah blah blah. So basically, Sephardic Judaism emerges after Islam invades Europe. Uh,
Interesting.
and then, so that's was Jesus Ashkenazi? Not even remotely.
No,
Was he Sephardic? Not even remotely.
no.
Because remember, Ashkenazi Jews, let's say they do have some pure-blooded Judahite in them, maybe
Mhm.
the ones who rejected Jesus and were
Yeah.
cursed to go somewhere else.
Mhm.
The Eastern European Jews mixed heavily with Slavic people,
Yeah.
Slavic tribes, Turkic tribes. That's where the
Then there's
Khazar things,
the Khazars. How do you pronounce it? Khazars.
Khazars, Khazarian. Yeah.
Mhm.
And they mix with those. So Jesus had nothing to do with Slavic people or Eastern European, nothing like that. So the Jews are mixing in with all those people, the Ashkenazi. the Sephardic are mixing in with all these Muslims. Okay. Arabic people were, for the most part, confined to Arabia until Islam
Mhm.
unleashed them to the whole Mediterranean. And now we have one ethnic group. It's more or
Mhm.
less one ethnic group, one eye color, one hair color, one skin color that
Mhm.
blotched out in all of North Africa, much of southwestern Europe until
Mhm.
some Christian heroes went and fought them off, uh, and most of the Levant. So before then, we touched on last time was there were so many fair-haired people, light hair, light eyes. If we had to put our finger on it, Jesus probably looked like a Northern European. Why can we say
Sure.
that? Because that's what all the Greek and Roman busts in Africa
Mhm.
look like. That's what the Greeks and the Romans looked like when they were there, way, way before Islam browned the
Mhm.
whole area out. North Africa was largely white. The
Is
east, the eastern Levant,
Mhm.
the coasts of Israel were largely white. And this brings us to red hair. Red hair. Uh, we talked about with Columbus last time a little bit. Red hair
Mhm.
has always been a marker or an indicator of Jewishness. The two people who have the most red hair in the world today are the Celts, so that some of the
Mhm.
Northern Europeans, and the Jewish people, both Sephardic and Ashkenazi, have
Interesting.
lots and lots of red hair. You know who doesn't have any red hair? Pretty much Italians. So Columbus having red hair, who knows?
Yeah,
Muhammad had.
I think you made a very convincing argument. If people want to look in the last one, some people still like to argue it, but it was pretty overwhelming the evidence.
Well, yeah, man. So those are the two largest ethnic groups, divisions of Judaism, subdivisions. Then there's another one that's Mizrahi. This is less than 1% of Judaism in the
Oh,
world.
I didn't
They
know it was that small.
they have no influence in America whatsoever, pretty much.
No.
Mizrahi, it pretty much just means Eastern.
Mhm.
It's not a unified collection. It's kind of what they want you to think it means is it's all the Jews who stayed in the Middle East the whole time,
Yeah.
throughout everything. Oh, they've always been there. Well, today, what we're finding out is most Mizrahi Jews are
Mhm.
really Sephardic Jews who are trying to paint
Oh, trying to
themselves
act like they came from there.
as more Middle Eastern because they can
The most
pass as more Middle Eastern.
those
But
are mostly Sephardic Jews, the one that stayed around, like was it the Sassoon
yeah,
family, whatever, with the opium trade and all that.
yeah.
In
Now,
oh,
so those are the three
mhm.
major groups of Jews on the planet today, and Jesus was none of them. He was not even remotely close to any of them. Aside from maybe the red hair genes, some of
Yeah.
his family might have had red hair. Some of his followers,
Mhm.
Judas is said to have had red hair. Mary Magdalene said to have red
Mhm.
hair, and all this. Jesus had nothing to do with the Jews of today. Theologically, his beliefs were clearly
Yeah,
opposed,
synagogue of
and
Satan, he called them, so yeah,
yep,
obviously.
biologically, he's very different too because he had not mixed with Slavs like Ashkenazi
Mhm.
had, and he had never mixed with Muslims or Arabs because, like the
Mhm.
Sephardic did. Another important distinction that, might be a good segue into the vegetarianism
Mhm.
is, not to push this on anyone. At most, Jesus maybe was a pescatarian. Okay, there's one instance where
Yeah.
Jesus has fish in his mouth. He seems to have helped his friends fish, but his upbringing was almost certainly wholly vegetarian. Jesus's
Mhm.
blood brother James, Yaakov, however you want to say his name,
Yeah.
was is universally remembered as a
Mhm.
lifelong vegetarian.
Yeah, this is
Uh,
well accepted, right? And no, this isn't, like,
yep.
disputed, that fact.
Now people say, well, they were Jews. They had Passover. What do you mean they ate lamb?
Mhm.
No, that's not the case. Did you know? Just put Jesus to the side for a sec, because I
Mhm.
don't want people to get hung up on their Jesus and
Yeah.
their what their family does. Just put Jesus to the side for a sec. Did you know that many Jews, thousands and thousands of Jews in Jesus's time, observed the Passover and other religious holidays with no lamb, no
Didn't know that.
bloodshed, no flesh. This is not a conspiracy theory. So Jesus and John the Baptist probably emerged from a group that
Mhm.
people remember as the Essenes, also the Nazarenes. Now we got to pump the brakes for a sec because there's a lot of nonsense and kind of fantasy that goes on with the Essenes. People want them to be like Atlantean aliens from the future who, were absolutely perfect and they were light workers and 5D angels and all. So people really go off the deep end with the Essene theories. But what we do know is the Essenes were passionate about vegetarianism. They did not, uh, you know, for the most part, they were totally opposed to animal sacrifice. Their interpretation of the scripture pointed away from animal sacrifice. They condemned it. And that's ultimately why people like John the Baptist and the community who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls had departed from the mainstream establishment at Jerusalem, who were, they believed the focus of their religion was animal sacrifice. So basically, the distinction I'm trying to make here is if we really want to prove how different Jesus was from even the Jews in his time that he's criticizing, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. By the way, Pharisee, Sadducee, the next biggest group was Essene, or maybe the Zealots. So those are the four big groups: Pharisee, Sadducee, Essene, and the Zealots. So the Pharisees were told die out. The Sadducees are we're told the bulk of modern day Judaism is the direct spiritual successor of the Pharisees that Jesus was arguing with most of the time. So regardless of Khazars or bloodlines or whoever's changed,
Yeah.
uh, converted this or that, what's important is these people are interpreting the scripture closely to how the Pharisees did that Jesus was warring against. So
That so
Jesus had,
that the people he was fighting with, that's who the interpretation is. Interesting,
yeah,
and it would make sense that he could be a vegetarian or at least respect life. It's like God's creatures, and he did
right,
attack the temple that was doing sacrifices.
yep.
So it's like,
And Jesus's vision for the future was clearly a bloodless one. We touched on that last episode, but the important distinction here is, I want to paint a picture for people of what Jesus really looked like. Jesus was probably, based off the descriptions of the Essenes back then, Jesus was probably over 6 feet tall, had light hair, fair hair, and light colored eyes. I would bet $1 million on it. Okay. That's the
mhm,
description of most of the Israelites up until then. That's what most of the people around the Eastern Mediterranean looked like till Islam spread around. But what's important is some of the Jews back then were writing this themselves, that the Essenes were often 6 inches, maybe even a whole foot taller than the other Jews around them
wow.
because of their lifestyle, because of their rigorous. They were almost like ascetic in some of their
Mhm,
practices. Maybe stretching and some things that similar to like what we'd call yoga today.
mhm,
They were into poses, stretching, and fortifying the body. These were not the temple
yeah.
Jews who were almost like Wall Street, finance
Yeah, like
bros,
weak and
workers.
like, yeah. Most of the
Yeah,
great men throughout history always wanted to be in shape too. They
yeah.
had
So
money or connections.
being a carpenter too, he probably he was a pretty strong guy, and basically Josephus and people like Josephus. People say, "Oh, Josephus was a Roman agent, or whatever." But people like him would write about the Essenes,
Mhm,
uh, that they were much taller than the other Jews, and that they lived far longer. So they actually
interesting.
lived. The Essenes were said to live over 100 years old routinely. 120 was not uncommon.
Mhm.
Um, I believe Josephus says that himself and others. So
So it seems very possible with the right environment, right food, right, working out, that type
mhm.
of stuff.
Now, the earliest Christians would be labeled Nazarenes, and the Nazarenes more or less emerged out of the Essenes. So, what we're showing here is there were Jews who, back then, who were not only nothing to do with modern Jews biologically or culturally or theologically, but also their diet would have been different. Their
Mhm.
attitudes towards holistic health would have been a lot different. And this really, demonstrates how far apart these communities were and how
Mhm.
uh, it's really not fair or educated at all to say Jesus was Jewish by today's standards. So,
And that's manipulated by, the politicians, the Zionists, and also people on the opposite end, like Adam Green, who attack it. So I think it's important to say he's not Jewish. Back to vegetarian. Do you know why some of these guys are vegetarian? It's because of love of animals, or is it health, or?
yeah, so it's really just a different interpretation of the Old Testament. We don't have to switch too many things up, but uh, going back to the beginning of the Bible, we clearly see God's original design, his
Mhm.
perfect ideal design is vegetarian. So Genesis chapter 1 verse 29 says, "Fruit and herb bearing seed will be your food for humanity." That's a clear commandment. And that only changes after Noah gets off the ark. Noah gets
Mhm.
off the ark, the whole world is destroyed. Maybe there's no vegetables even left alive. Noah brought some food
Yeah.
with him on the ark, probably ate most of it by then, gets off the ark, and God lifts the prohibition on eating flesh. It's not really a prohibition, but God says, now you're off the ark. As I gave you the fruit and vegetables before as food, now you can eat animal foods.
Mhm.
Now, important. Many Jews back then interpreted that not as an allowance to eat the flesh, but only as an allowance to eat the milk, the eggs, um, honey, animal
Yeah.
products. So, not to make this like an ethics debate or vegan
Yeah.
vegetarian thing, but the Jews had these own questions and differing interpretations even back in Jesus' time that resulted in different communities popping up. And like I said, the Dead Sea Scrolls, much of what we know about ancient Judaism was confirmed through the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were
Mhm.
preserved by this special group, the Essenes. Uh, loosely identifiable group. There wasn't like one set type of Essene that they all match that description, but um, so whatever. So right from the beginning of the Bible, there's this vegetarian ideal. And it's
Mhm.
only after man welcomes sin into the world that we then depart from that vegetarian ideal. Now, just to zoom back in on Noah getting off the ark, people say, well, God clearly granted Noah the right to eat meat, if we want to interpret it that way. They also point to Cain and Abel. That one gets misconstrued a lot too. People think Cain and Abel was an animal sacrifice. That's not the case. That's not how they interpreted it back then either, thousands of years ago. Cain and Abel were both vegetarians. So, for those who aren't familiar, Cain, after Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden, Cain offers fruit, like a bowl of fruit, and then Abel offers. He presents his flock. He's or the fatlings of his flock, the firstlings of his flock. And the way I see this is like a father coming home from work and saying, "All right, sons, how productive were you today?"
Mhm.
And basically, Cain, who's lazy, is what his real offense was being lazy and ungrateful, jealous, envious, not a positive person. Uh, he only presents fruit. Now we can interpret that as very lazy because Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and God seems to be pushing us towards industry. When Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden, God says, "Now you're going to have to toil for
Now you have
your
to work and
food."
stuff. It's not perfect. You don't have just the
Exactly.
fruits and stuff anymore.
I want you to harvest. I want you to plant stuff in the ground and like crops, bread, things like that. You put in some time, put in some effort, some patience. It's not just we're not just monkeys in the garden just plucking fruit and sitting around all day. So Cain probably came across as lazy. That was the offense, was he hadn't followed, uh, he wasn't industrious like his brother.
Mhm.
Now, way back, the Jews used to interpret this. The ancient Israelites interpreted this as, um, this is the origin of don't mix wool with linen or
Mhm.
animal fiber with non-animal fiber. This kind of goes back to this too. Um, in the Garden of Eden, they didn't really need clothes, so those
Mhm.
sheep are providing clothing as well. And what it really was that Cain, uh, or that Abel was offering, was, it's called uh, lanolin, lanolin. It's basically the oil from sheep's wool. It's this fat. It's very prized, precious substance. It's very important in like ancient agrarian societies. They use this stuff for everything. Um, that that was this precious good that was discovered then. So basically, people always get confused and they say, "Oh, uh, Cain was bad because he was vegetarian. Abel was good because he was a
No,
carnivore." People love to dumb it
exactly.
down like that. What it really had to do with was being industrious and following God's, his encouragement.
I find
So
people always like to attack me for being a vegetarian, probably the same. I'm never pushing on them. I just feel morally for my own morals. I don't want to eat it. And, my friends that actually hunt and stuff, they respect the animal, they kill a lot more. But to me,
yeah,
especially if I'm not killing it myself, I feel like, how could I go and eat these things that are abused? And people get like weird and defensive, despite me never being like pushy, telling them what to eat. They like start trying to push me to eat meat.
yeah. Well, the way I see hunters, I have hunting friends too. You might think this is funny.
Mhm.
Hunting, getting up close and yeah, really getting in touch with what you're killing. I can kind of see why that's commendable, but at the same time, who do you respect more? The IDF soldier who pulls the trigger right in the child's face, or
Yeah.
the man funding it back in America? At some point, you do have to blame the man who
Yeah.
pulls the trigger. And
Yeah. And
I'm
I
not
would never hunt. That's why.
I'm not
Maybe if I'm
equating
starving, I would.
I'm not equating, someone hunting by themselves to like factory farming. I know
Mhm.
those are totally opposed, but the
Yeah.
principle's the same. If you wouldn't kill someone in your whatever, doesn't matter.
No,
Let's not get
I agree with you. That's why
yeah,
I don't hunt. My friends have tried to talk. If I had to, if I had to choose, I would kill it myself to respect it, but I still don't, because we don't have to eat meat, and I prefer not to. I don't feel right. I feel like
yeah.
it is God's creature. I don't want people to act like animals aren't God's creatures. I don't understand how they're coming to that conclusion.
It's another extreme example. It's almost kind of like a pedophile who engages in the act themselves, or versus like just kind of consuming the material
Yeah.
by themselves.
Mhm.
If we're interpreting the animal as a victim, it brings a whole nother dimension
No, that's true.
towards whether pulling
I,
the trigger
I
up
do.
close and personal is better.
I do feel the
And it,
factory farms are just so evil, though, that everyone just ignores them. They bury it. They make it like illegal to release videos of it. It's such a level of disgusting evil that no one wants to talk about.
oh yeah, 100%. And this whole beef tallow and all this kind of last push by the beef industry to keep big
Mhm.
beef alive. It's really just byproducts, waste products. This tallow that everyone thinks is a
Mhm.
health tonic that's going to cure their everything wrong with them. It's sludge. It's zombie sludge. It's the
Mhm.
rendered fat of a corpse. And people
That's
say,
disgusting.
oh no, it's just the nice little fat from around the liver and the kidneys, and it's oh no, it's the choicest fat. No, guys. Tallow is a waste product. People make their own tallow and they use knuckle fat, they use
Mhm.
joint fat, the nastiest parts of the animal you wouldn't touch.
Yeah.
And so whatever. I feel strongly about this stuff too. And another misconception is that vegetarianism is somehow part of the new world order or this agenda. Well, Jesus's vision of the future was pretty vegetarian. The
Mhm.
some of the prophets leading up to Jesus as well. The vision, like we said last time, the lion will lay with the lamb, the lion will lay with the wolf, or the wolf will lay with the lamb, and the lion will eat straw. If that's not a vegetarian, paradise in the
Mhm.
future, I don't know what is.
Well, and they
People
want us to
say
eat bugs, not vegetarian. They're literally saying you'll eat the bugs.
exactly. Now,
Yeah.
Bill Gates's favorite food
Mhm.
to this day is a beef hamburger, a cheeseburger. He pushes beef on people way more than he ever has vegetarian foods. Now,
Mhm.
we can't blame him for trying to get rich off both, but he's been pushing meat far harder on
Yeah.
humanity than he has ever pushed vegetarianism. And his vision
Mhm.
for the future, exactly right, Jake, is lab grown meat, fake meat.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what he's proposing. So, vegetarianism, I think of Plato, Pythagoras,
Mhm.
Socrates, uh, whatever. But
Lots of grace. I'm trying to think. I know the tons of the grace. What's the other one? Da Vinci is
Tesla,
vegetarian.
yeah,
Yeah,
Da
Tesla, Da
Vinci,
Vinci, I think. So lots of the great men. I just don't know why people get like so defensive if you tell them vegetarian, but it was not.
yeah.
But anyway,
All right, man. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. What else?
Oh, I had to let's get into the Khazarians really quick. I know we kind of mentioned it, but I don't know why people get so worked up over that theory. Like some people get mad about it or they want to say that's not really the Jews, it's the Khazarians, but it's just that doesn't really make any sense because they work hand in hand with the Sephardic Jews. I mean,
Mhm.
first off, do you think the theory mostly true? And then why do you think people get so like emotional over it?
So the Khazarian theory that many European Jews, especially Eastern European Jews, actually descend from the Khazarians, it is it's true, but with an asterisk. Okay.
Mhm,
There's always been a question about where did the Ashkenazi Jews originate from?
mhm,
Ashkenaz does not mean that they're descended from Ashkenaz. Ashkenaz means that they went to the land of Ashkenaz, the land that they used to call Ashkenaz, which is kind of like Germany, Poland, Hungary, like, Central Europe, Eastern Europe.
mhm,
Um, that was historically referred to as the land of Ashkenaz, just like the land in Iberia was called Sephirat. So that's where Sephardic comes
mhm.
from. Just means that they went there,
Yeah.
that became their name. So people get mixed up with that Ashkenaz. They say, "Oh, well, Ashkenaz was the son of or was one of Japheth's descendants, so they're not even Semitic." Don't get too hung up on that. Some people do, but then
Mhm,
when we get to the Khazarians, it's true that the nobility and the
mhm.
king of Khazaria did mass convert, but it's debated as to how much of the peasantry or the lower classes actually converted. We
It might
know
not
that
have been very many people even.
it's widely accepted that the nobility converted to Judaism sometime between 700 and 900 in the
Mhm.
Khazarian Empire. Well, another thing is, do we ever learn about the Khazarian Empire in school? No, they
No.
were a huge, huge, force to be reckoned with back then. We learn about Byzantine and Ottoman and Persian and
Mhm,
all this stuff, but they don't really talk about this big question mark,
no.
right there. And again, it's kind of what links like Kazakhstan kind of has that similar
Mhm,
root, Kaza, um,
mhm.
and Ukraine. Much of the conflict that's going on in Ukraine today, people should really ask why are many why is the global leftist media establishment so on board with
Yeah.
Israel and Ukraine. Those two conflicts
Mhm.
seem to go hand in hand. Um, they seem to almost be two fronts of the same battle in a way,
No,
and
they
that
do.
that does,
Zelensky said he wants Ukraine to be a big Israel. He's Jewish,
yeah.
so people don't know. Most people probably know that are watching, but the president of Ukraine is Jewish, and he's in the Epstein files, all these ties. He goes far beyond him with the Jewish connections, but it's a little bizarre.
Well, he. So whatever, Ukraine, Israel, kind of the same thing. That goes back
Mhm,
to the Khazarians. So the Khazarians, in part, they originate in that kind of area loosely. And over time, they made their way into Europe, Central Europe, Western Europe, giving up their previous occupation as kind of like this ruling class of this empire. They then were distancing themselves and, um, you know, uh, merging into the surrounding populations and slowly made their way west to Germany. So kind of over from Ukraine, almost like Russia, slowly over a couple hundred years made their way to Germany. That's where families like the Rothschilds and them end up in Germany.
Mhm.
Now, the Khazarian thing has a lot of truth to it, but again, how many Slavs or people out there are like full-blooded Khazarians? Not many.
Probably not very many.
Um, yeah, it was really just the nobility who converted to Judaism and then
Mhm.
kind of took the wealth that they had absorbed in that area and then moved uh, into Western Europe. That's where the whole thing becomes a question mark because
Yeah, 'cause we don't really know. Yeah. We
they
can't know
already
exactly.
yeah, you can't know exactly for sure who's who, for sure who's who. And also there was already this question of where do the Ashkenazi Jews come from? That's already a question that is not fully
But
answered.
we don't fully know, yeah. Well, also, I don't wanna get too off track, but just like Jacob Frank and Sabotage Zevi, where like Jacob Frank was in Poland, he mass converted his people to Christianity, but they kept practicing their weird version of Judaism, and same with Sabotage Zevi. He was in the Ottoman Empire, he mass converted to Islam, and they can trace them, to the Young Turks, I think they call it the Dome, the massacre, the, Armenian genocide tracks directly to his converts, but they were secretly
Yeah,
practicing Judaism or
yeah,
a weird version of it.
totally. Yeah, that's a little bit later on from the Khazarian thing. 700, 900 is when people point to the
Or I think Zabad Zevi was like 1600. So that was way later. This is like
yeah, yeah.
more like recent times. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's they all connect together because people love to focus on the Khazarian thing as if
Mhm.
we've all heard people say, "Oh no, those are the bad Jews.
Yep.
Like all the other ones are good. It's just the Khazarians." Well, put the Khazarians to one side. Okay,
Mhm.
remember at pretty much the exact same time between 700 and 900, there's at least 100,000, 200,000 Jews in Iberia, the
Mhm.
Sephardic Jews, they'd later become known as Sephardic, but they're the ones who let the Muslims in. They're
Mhm.
the ones who are welcoming the Muslims, aiding the Muslims. When the Muslims fully take over, they call it the Jewish Golden Age, excuse me, Golden Age. And then, the Khazarians had nothing to do with that. Are we going to call those ones the good ones? Like, oh, those are the great ones that we need to make peace with today? Not exactly. But also, another important distinction is, to bring up the Ottomans real quick. Fast forward to Christian times when the Catholics reconquer Spain and Portugal, Iberia. The Jews then fall back under Christian control. Around 1391, we start seeing mass exoduses and conversions of Jews, leading up to
Mhm.
1492. Right. So
Oh, yeah, that's
1391, there was these big conversions where at least 100,000 Jews converted in a
wow.
matter of a week in 1391 in Spain, and they became Christian. They would hide, they'd pretend to be Christian,
Mhm.
and then that kind of picks up the story that we talked about last time with Columbus. Um, when many of those Jews are expelled, many of them go to Africa, many of them go to the Americas, to the Caribbean. Some of them, many of them were welcomed to Portugal because they had about
Mhm.
5 more years in Portugal than they did Spain.
Mm.
Like as far as they were allowed to stay in Portugal and really consolidate their power. Uh, Another place that welcomed them was the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan of Morocco, the Sultan of over in Turkey, they they were sending ships, boatloads from Spain, saying, "Give us all your Jews." We want
Mhm.
the. They were taking them and putting them up into the nobility in Turkey and Morocco, and eventually they'd get kicked out there too. But at least in Morocco for the most part. But
Yeah, in Turkey, it's like until recently they were still, and people still debate in Turkey if this family still has, or not family, the whole descendants, the dome, I think we call, they'd still debate if they have a lot of power, which is
yeah,
very interesting. These are things
I don't.
impossible to be 100% on.
Yeah, I don't know too much about Turkey, but turkeys are native to Florida, and we've got a place in Florida called New Smyrna
Mhm.
that is named New Smyrna because Old Smyrna is modern day Izmir, Turkey. So it used to be a Greek city. The Greeks came to Florida, named this part uh, New Smyrna, and then Smyrna, the old Smyrna, went uh, back to the Turks or the Arabs, and now it's Izmir,
Interesting.
which is a very significant city because in the book of Revelation or somewhere in there at the end of the Bible, it says that there's a connection between Turkey and some of the churches there. Um, Smyrna being one of them, Izmir, Smyrna being connected to like the Antichrist or these seven cities or these seven churches are from the devil and they're going to kick off the apocalypse, and people interpret it all these different ways.
Interesting. Yeah, all these places, and then, well, the third temple is all like almost have been looking to all these different, societies, all wanting things that are real, and everything always connects back to the third temple too, being rebuilt. I
Oh,
find
totally.
that very bizarre. Like they're just absolutely obsessed, not just mainstream Jews, like all kinds of subgroups, Masons, like
Yeah,
it's,
man.
it's very bizarre. They really want to rebuild the temple. Let's go into like maybe the Americas and lost tribes a little bit though. Columbus left Spain on the day Jews were expelled. I think that's how he opens his diary, right?
Yeah.
But he goes through, where was the first place he came through? Because I know you're in Florida. I saw some old videos. I think I might have barely touched on this last time, but there are people that have lots of like Jewish customs and artifacts. This video I watched a year or two ago, but it was very
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, I don't know if the theory was maybe there could have been Jews there long before, or
Yeah. Yeah. We touched on it a little bit in the last episode, but
Mhm.
Columbus was looking for the Garden of Eden. And a big part of that, or what served as evidence for that, was he thought the Native Americans had this either Hebrew or Semitic ancestry. Somehow they were connected to the people, some people in the Bible. Um, Now, also, again, when we were saying last episode, Columbus was Jewish, we didn't give all the proof and the evidence for
Yeah,
that. But just real quick, there was at least 6 Jews on Columbus's ship that he was on. The ship doctor for all 3 ships was
mhm,
Jewish, so each ship had a Jewish doctor. Um, it was two Jews who convinced King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella to let Columbus go. So if people are in denial about Columbus being Jewish, they need to just go look it up for themselves.
yeah,
Again, Columbus could still be born in Italy and be Jewish. In fact,
yeah.
that's probably the case because his mother's name was Susanna.
Mhm,
It's a Hebrew name. The family business was weaving, extremely Jewish occupation back then. Believe it or
mhm,
not, every aspect of Jewish religion relies on weaving. So weaving the Torah was a woven scroll. Often the tent was woven. The tabernacle was woven.
mhm,
The the fringes on their clothes, like the tassels and stuff, are woven, and their prayer shawls and all this stuff. So uh, also map making and all these you know great clothing makers have often been Jewish, like
mhm,
Ralph Lauren, like Polo and
mhm.
stuff like that. Lots of Jews
Yeah,
make uh, brands like that. So textile, weaving, sewing, very Jewish industry, and that was the Columbus family industry. We talked about him
mhm,
having red hair.
yeah,
10% of Jewish men have red hair. Less than 0.5% of Italian men have red hair.
yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah, very
um,
rare in Italy. Well,
so
even in his own journal, wasn't he constantly quoting like the Old Testament, never the New Testament?
yeah, he certainly played the part of a Christian. That's
Mhm.
another thing that people miss is, yeah, he's pretending to be
Yeah,
Christian because that's what they did. So people
yeah,
say, oh, he was Catholic. He couldn't have been. No.
yeah.
But
The mass conversions were like before that. You said the 1300s, right, or late
yeah.
1300s.
So there's all these proofs. His financiers, he was not financed by the Spanish Catholic crown. The king and the queen
Mm.
said, "We don't want to finance him." That was a
Oh,
big
really? I
hang
didn't know that.
I'll tell you his financiers right now. So number one, he needed permission to leave, not
Mhm.
money. He needed permission. He needed sponsorship. He needed
Mhm.
the political or military backing in order to make it past the pirates out into the open ocean. Then he'd be, kind of
Mhm.
by himself. But he needed sponsorship, not financing. His financing came from four Jews primarily. Luis de Santangel,
Mhm.
who was by the way the royal scribe to Ferdinand and Isabel, Gabriel Sanchez, the royal treasurer, okay,
Mhm.
Don Isaac Aberbanel, the Portuguese philosopher, financier, also a court Jew, meaning he had a high position in the court, to Isabel. Uh, he was a counselor, like a advisor to Queen Isabel. And Spain's most powerful tax farmer. If anyone doesn't know what tax farming is, go look it up. It's like
Mhm.
tax collecting mixed with usury. Okay, it's like not good.
Sounds
Uh,
very
yeah,
something they'd be doing.
it's basically where you invest and trade other people's taxes. You pay someone's taxes for them and then charge them a higher rate.
Yeah, it sounds like shorting stocks, the type of or insurance, the type of stuff they do now. Exact
And
scams.
this is the control that the Jews had over the Spanish government back then, was they were the leading tax farmers. So the king, instead of paying his police and his tax collectors to go door to door
Mhm.
and charge everyone their taxes directly, he would basically say, "All right," the Jews would come to the king and say, "All right, how much do you need at minimum to be happy for all the taxes in the kingdom?"
Mhm.
And the king would come up with a number, and the Jews would pay it. They'd just pay it flat out. You need $1 billion from America for a whole year's worth of taxes. All right, done. There it is. Maybe they clipped it or
Mhm.
printed it out of thin air, but they
Yeah,
paid it.
right?
And then after paying the minimum uh, tax that the uh, the king needs for the total, okay, it's almost like selling weed or like a drug. Like,
Mhm.
you know, yes, you make more money breaking it down gram by gram, but that's
Yeah.
that's laborsome.
Yeah, that's
You'd
short.
rather just dish your ounce of weed or coke off
Yeah.
for the absolute minimum you need to
Mhm.
go buy another. I'll take the minimum, just spare myself the hard work. This guy will go sell it
Yeah.
for me, and he'll make more profit, and then he'll come back, and I can rely on him for reliable payment every time. It's kind of like the drug dealer philosophy a little bit. The tax farming, they'd pay the minimum for the total tax, and then they
Mhm.
would themselves, with like bounty hunters and like the
Yeah.
mafia, the Jews would then go door to door and charge the maximum tax, the
Wow.
maximum legal tax. That's why it's tax farming. Then also, you could have a contract where the king is trusting you. You pay the king the minimum, then you have the rights to go seize the maximum from the citizens.
Damn.
That's why tax collectors and Jews were often disliked as well. They had that job.
Never heard of this. That's
Like,
interesting, but not shocking. I never heard of it. A lot
yeah,
of this history
it
gets
was
left out. So much history gets left out, I
so.
feel like.
So instead of filing your taxes yourself and sending it in, you'd have Dog the bounty hunter banging down your door, demanding the maximum,
The
and that was
Jewish
tax.
bounty hunter that's like, "You owe me this and that, a pound of flesh." What was that?
Just to be fair, Christians did it too, Muslims did it
Mhm.
too, but it was almost exclusively Jews in Spain in that
Yeah.
time. Now,
Well,
but basically that gets us to you know Columbus's financiers were very
mhm.
influential Jews who were for the most part doing that. Many of them were involved in that. That was the Jews' occupation in society largely. Um,
Usury or tax collecting, it's always, that's what I've wondered, like, all around your world, you see both Islamic and Christian, there are all these powerful positions where they can kinda do whatever, and then you start seeing they're doing things like this. So the king's like, "Oh, they let them do whatever," or printing
well,
money out of thin air, that's the bizarre one.
these four rabbis um, convinced king, not rabbis, sorry, two of them are rabbis, but four Jews convinced Ferdinand and Isabel to let Columbus go, to give him the green light. he was already funded by these Jews. That was already ready. They just
Yeah.
needed the seal of approval. Then he relied on the astronomical instruments of two more Jews, Abraham Zacuto, who was the world's leading, navigational expert back then, and his pupil Joseph Vecinio. And these guys were, I think they were both Portuguese, but or maybe not. One of them was, but they ended up also working for the kings of Portugal, the kings of Spain, and they were instrumental in the truest sense of the word, instrumental in getting Columbus, uh, giving Columbus the ability to leave and cross the ocean.
Mm.
So he had six Jewish backers and contributors. He had six more Jews on his ship, three Jewish doctors, a Jewish surgeon, um, and the first letter he writes back was to uh, Luis de Santangel, his Jewish financier, Columbus,
Mm.
and then um, the first, believe it or not, we talked about him landing on a Jewish holiday last time. The
Mhm.
first man to sight land was Jewish, a converso.
Mm.
The first guy to spot land, his name was Rodrigo de Triana. First sighting land in America. So, and then
Yeah.
there were, three or four other Jews involved. And if I want to quote some rabbis, which may or may not be a biased source, if we
Yeah.
quote some rabbis real quick, they say up to 2/3 of Columbus's sailors were Jewish.
Wow.
So, and
Some
if,
of them probably crypto Jews, but well, it
if
would
we
make sense too with the financiers. They would probably want to put someone they trust, which is more likely to be someone Jewish.
Speaking of who you trust, so the king and the queen back then would choose someone they really trusted to watch over Columbus.
Mhm.
That guy was also Jewish. So the guy that they chose to watch
Interesting.
over Columbus was also Jewish.
So in these expeditions, they would send someone to watch over 'em. I
Yeah,
guess that would make sense. They're spending so much money on it. Because how many
the
ships did he
word,
have? Was it 3 or 4 or
yeah, three on the first voyage and
Mhm.
like 15 or so on the second or third. But the name for that was Veeder, or the Vidor, I believe, the guy whose job it was to watch and make
Mhm.
sure the king and the queen's wishes were being, respected. But he was Jewish, so where were his real allegiances? But um, we talked about this before, but yeah, man. All right, but the Native Americans, there are many artifacts that have been found across America with Hebrew writing on them, Paleo Hebrew, uh, even more, many, many more, if we call it Phoenician, what qualifies as Phoenician writing. There's
Mhm.
dozens of those found across North America. Um, and then, Columbus saw what thought were Hebrew traits. Now, remember, what is Mormonism? The reason we don't hear much about this
Mhm.
lost tribe of Israel in America theory, the reason we don't hear
Yeah.
about that anymore is because the Mormons kind of took that theory and made like a whole religion out of it.
Oh, really? I
Um,
didn't know that. So Mormons
yes,
believe
that's what Mormons believe is that the Americas were involved in the Bible or extra
Mhm.
biblical events. So people from the Bible, people from, the, Jews, basically Israelites, got in a boat, went to America, landed in Florida, according to many of them, and actually then mixed in with the Native Americans, battled with Native Americans, created two distinct ethnic groups uh,
Mhm.
of Native Americans, lighter skin, darker skin. These people fight over hundreds of years, and eventually they bury the records of all these battles and their family in the ground, and Joseph Smith finds that. So it's kind of like
Mm.
fan fiction almost. If I have a lot of
Yeah.
Mormons. I respect Mormons a lot. I like Mormons. I like their story. We sell Mormon literature here,
Yeah.
but it's kind of like fan fiction on what we there's there was a little bit of evidence for Israelite
Mhm.
people in these mounds that Joseph Smith was digging in when he was
Mhm.
a young kid. And what I think happened was he pieced together some truth with a lot of his
And then he
imagination.
added a lot to it.
But
Yeah.
what I think was true is that there were all these Hebrew artifacts all over America, and the Mormons just kind of stepped up and said, "Oh well, we're going to try to explain it in our way," and that grew into this big religion. But
These are here before Columbus,
you know,
correct? These artifacts, they're artifacts that were here before Columbus?
yeah, believed to be. So
Mm,
here's another book. Is I'll bring up two books real quick. Is
mm,
The Seminoles of Florida by Minnie Moore Wilson. This is
mhm.
about the Seminole Indians here in Florida. They were like the last real wild Indians in America. They were chased down into Florida. They never surrendered. They're like the 300 Spartans, you know?
Yeah, they fought to
They
the
were
end.
like they were like the real 300 Seminoles here. You can look them up. And half of them got sent out to Oklahoma, but the rest who stayed in Florida got like this legendary status, like they never surrendered. And now
Mhm.
they're loaded. The Seminole Indians were the first ones to do the casinos.
Oh,
Okay,
dang, they're balling.
so well they're balling, but could that be evidence that they have some Jewish blood in them?
They
That
got
they have
gambling going,
that they're
interesting,
the Seminole Indians are rich, they're loaded. So
interesting.
when you're born into the Seminole Indian tribe, you're born wealthy. You
Wow.
get yeah, look this up. So the
They're like
Seminoles were the
The
first
Jews of the Indians, I see.
pretty
Well, I'm
much.
in Las Vegas right now, most people think it was, like, created by the Italian mafia,
Yeah.
which they had the ties, but the
Well
Jewish mafia was more putting it together.
you know the Hard Rock Casino and Hard Rock Cafe, the Hard Rock,
Mhm.
empire, that's the Seminole Indians. They own that.
Oh, wow.
They're billionaires. They're one of the
They're
richest
definitely the Jewish Indians then.
they're one of the richest nations in the world.
That's
Nation.
crazy.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
they but okay, so this book, a woman who lived alongside them for decades, she wrote this book. She was convinced about half of this, almost half this book is kind of making the case that they are
Mhm.
descended from the lost tribes of Israel. The hats they used to wear looked like Orthodox Jewish hats.
Yeah, I saw
Um,
that.
way back, they had these, they had rumors that they used to do circumcision. They had
Mhm.
10 to 12 tribes, like the tribes of Israel, within one nation. So, like Muskogee Nation or Seminole Nation, they have 12 tribes or clans within that, just like the
Mhm.
tribes of Israel, like
Wow.
Bear Clan, Otter Clan, Wind Clan. Many of those animals and items are the same as the
Mhm.
12 tribes of Israel. It's like a subdivision
Mhm.
within a tribe. So they have that in common. Many tribes do, but other things they would leave their hair like a peyote, like the
That's right, I saw that. I
kind of
think
the
it's from your
curls.
video, the hair coming down.
Yep, they would do many, many things. They would isolate the women when they got their period in a hut for themselves. Stay over there.
Mhm.
Don't bother me with none of that. Like, basically, that's an Israelite thing too. That's from the Old Testament, and their punishments for crimes seem to line up with Exodus and Leviticus. And
Mm.
so this isn't me saying it, this is her saying it. And
Yeah.
she was 300, 400 years after Columbus, and she came to the
Mm.
same conclusion about a whole nother group of Indians. Then there was this guy named James
Mhm.
Adair. James Adair was a friend to multiple of the founding fathers of America. And in 1775, it's an easy one to remember too, right before
Mhm.
1776, he wrote a book called the History of the American Indians,
Mhm.
and it's mostly the Indians of the Southeast United States that would become the Seminoles. So the Chickasaw, Cherokee, Creek, uh, whatever, all the southeastern tribes. He Same thing. He lived with them for about 40 years. This guy had an Indian wife.
Mhm.
He fought in their wars on the Indian side. He lived among them, dressed like them, everything. After 40 years of being with them, he was convinced they were some of the old Israelites from the Bible.
Mhm.
And remember, we're not saying that, like, all right, the old Israelites were Native Americans.
Yeah,
We're saying that some Israelites made it to America, no matter what they looked like,
yeah,
and made
and
some,
interbred a little bit, and some
yeah,
of the traditions stayed on.
they made some impression, some influence on the Native Americans, and the Mormons really hone in on that. But so that other book is amazing too, The
Mhm.
History of the American Indians, and the dude is going through every single practice they had and saying they're Jews, they're Israelites, they're. So this one, that other one's good. And the whole theory, there's Wikipedia on it, the Jewish American Indian theory. Um,
So
yeah,
that's
man.
good. You can get a mainstream source. It's at least worth considering. Like, whether you believe it or not, it's worth looking at these things. Is there any evidence or conspiracies that Columbus believed that like people had been to the Americas before? I know the official story is he's
Yeah.
trying to go around the world and thought he discovered India. But is there any other alternative
Yeah.
theories on that you know of or no?
Yeah. We talked about on the last episode, we mentioned Ophir. So King Solomon allegedly had this place that had really good gold that he kept secret that
Mhm,
he'd send his fleet to go get, treasure from. And
mhm,
some people think that was Venezuela. Some people think that was
mhm,
uh, the Southeast United States. Um, but there's another term that he used, Tarshish. So Ophir and Tarshish were these places that treasure would
mhm.
come from, and it was this land far away. There's another uh, term that would come up that I think I'm going to mess up. Azareth or Arazeth. Azareth. Basically, this was another like land across the ocean that was almost like mythologized in some of the Hebrew
Mhm.
traditions. And Columbus was aware of all three of those. So he did believe he was searching or trying to rediscover the Garden of Eden and these lost lands. But yeah. So
Yeah. Seems like lots of the people have the theories of like these lost lands. And if you look, I haven't looked in the mid times like Columbus, but if you look way back at some of these structures like in Peru, they clearly don't seem like they were built by the Inca and stuff. To me, I'm
yeah,
pretty certain there's been some lost civilizations and we don't fully understand history, but like how much of it and what, I don't have an answer for that nor a theory. But like just going to Peru, looking at what they've built, you're like, no way 130 Spaniards conquered people that built this stuff.
totally. There's a lot of examples of that. Also, um, oh man, I forgot what I was gonna say. Actually, sorry.
No, it's all good. I had a few more things to
Uh,
ask, but yeah, there's so much history in general. It's like trying to figure out what's true, what's not. Things getting erased. Like the last couple of days, I've been reading about the Sabbateans. I recommend you look into that because that was like a little
yeah,
bit's out now, but for a while they intentionally tried burying it because they believed the guy. People would believe basically he was the Jewish Messiah had came back. They almost took over the Ottoman Empire, and then afterwards they kind of just try to erase in the history. It's just so you read
yeah,
these stories, you're like, this should have heard about this, but you never hear about it. It's like that was
100%.
my it's selective what they teach
Well,
and what you can admit.
I mean, speaking of like kind of crazed Messiah figures, that might be a good segue if you want to talk about this guy, uh, Guma Aguiar. Um, this kind of brings it up to modern times a little
Mhm,
bit. Uh, but there was this guy. If people, like to hear about conspiracy theories, Jewish conspiracy theories, this is a big one that no one's ever heard of. Totally buried. And the only reason I know about it is because I grew up here, 20 years ago or so, 15, 20 years ago, this was all over the news. Um, there was a guy named Guma Aguiar. Okay.
mhm,
I believe he was Brazilian, if I'm not mistaken. He was from Brazil, I believe, ended up in Florida. So he would later become a Florida resident.
mhm,
But at some point, he got into business with a family member, um, investments in oil, some other investing, where basically he made a risky investment in Texas and became a multimillionaire, soon to become billionaire overnight.
mhm,
Okay, in investing in oil fields in Texas and other stuff like that. And that was in part due to his family connections, but he becomes very, very wealthy. And so yeah, not a very well-known guy. Guma Aguiar, he was
I heard of them.
one of the world's youngest billionaires. I think he made a billion or close to it when he was like 30 years old.
That'd be
So
nice.
yeah, now he then gets rich, moves his family to South Florida, and it's discovered at some point that some family members do some digging, and it's you know brought to the light that he actually has some Jewish ancestry
Mm,
on his mother's side. which means he's I think they call it halakhically
Yep.
Jewish. So that is people. A lot of people say like, "Oh, your mother has to be Jewish for you to be Jewish." That's not true. What
Mm.
is true is if your mother is Jewish, you have irrevocable Jewish status, meaning you are biologically Jewish. You cannot help it.
Whether you like it or not, you're a Jew.
Exactly. So that's the way I like to see that. People misinterpret that. So some of these business partners who do happen to be Jewish then start pressuring him to convert to Judaism. No, not just Judaism. I believe it was Orthodox Judaism.
Mm.
It's like 0 to 100. Like dive into the pool with all your clothes on. Like,
Mm.
but he's pressured. He's feeling this pressure. There's actually, if you go read these articles, there's actually some indication that they may have been withholding like certain business deals. Like, hey, you can only get so far
Yeah.
when you fully make
I mean,
this
Epstein files kind of show some of that.
conversion. Now, when you convert as an adult, um, if you weren't circumcised or if certain things like that, they have to actually reproduce or uh like what would be the word, reopen your circumcision, revisit it, which basically means if you're an adult converting to Judaism, they they make you they prick the tip of your dick with a did you know about this? They prick the tip of your
What do
dick
you do to the kids, or is it
with a
something separate?
with a tack. They draw blood from the tip of your penis in order to symbolize a new circumcision. Like, this is your proper circumcision. Like, oh yeah, you had it before, but that wasn't complete. This is a we have to reopen
Does
that
the
and
rabbi put it in his mouth
sign
like
it.
you do to the babies, or no?
No, I think they show
Like, I hope not.
they show some immense self control, and they don't put the hot sauce on their tongue. But basically, um, that happens in adult conversions to Orthodox Judaism. So whether he was pricked or not, I don't know the specifics, but could be. Eventually, he gives into the pressure and he converts to Judaism. Now, what they don't tell you, okay, is that many of the people connected publicly in the inner circle of this man, Guma Aguiar, were actually neuro linguistic programmers, meaning that they're master conversational hypnotists. Do you
Wow.
know what do you know what neuro linguistic programming is?
I've not heard it, but I kinda understand. So it's like, it's kinda
It's
hypnotizing people through just, like,
it's what it sounds like.
talking,
Neuro linguistic programming. It's
and
it's
after the
exactly.
people around him had talked him into doing that.
Have you ever heard of the Annexium cult
Yeah,
in upstate New York? And
yeah.
they were in Mexico too. They were like almost like international. Uh, that was a Jewish sex cult that used neuro linguistic programming to hypnotize
Mhm.
people against their will to turn them into slaves. Also, real quick, one of those financiers of Columbus that I brought up, uh, one of those four was actually like a mad scientist, like wizard, and all these people who knew him say that he had a human zombie slave,
Wow.
like a what's the word? A golem. That he had a
Mhm.
golem. That he had either a corpse or some person who'd been hypnotized into lifelong subservience. So
Wow.
whatever. So put that to the side. Back to this Guma Aguiar guy. Many of the people publicly connected to him are also publicly proponents and experts of neurolinguistic programming. It's the same thing that happened in the Annexium cult, which was this Jewish guy, Keith
Mhm.
Raniere, and a group of he had a harem of Jewish, rich, wealthy Jewish women.
The Brofman sisters or
Yep,
daughters, which was that's like one of the most rich mafia
yep,
families, Jewish connected in Canada. They're like running Canada. They're tied in
yep,
with like the Epstein and all that.
yep. And there was a lot others too. And basically, they were neuro linguistic programming people. They offered self-help. It was almost like
Mhm.
Scientology. Like they get you
Yeah.
in with self-help and like some psychology tricks, like, hey, we can help you stop smoking. We can help you do this. Well, yeah, how do you stop people from smoking?
Yeah.
Hypnotizing them. That's the most effective way to stop someone from smoking or things like that, or Tourette's. And this is what this cult
Just real
claims.
quick, yeah, stop real quick. A guy has been calling me from this cult who had Tourette's. He says they cured it. Really nice guy. He's been
Yeah.
wanting to come on, but I don't know if I want to touch this or not. He's said he had Tourette's. He speaks positively of the cult. Really nice guy. I think he's actually Jewish himself. But
Oh,
I'm like, I
yes.
don't know if I could touch this.
That guy is one of that cult's
Mark,
claims to fame
what is his
is
name?
they
He's a
yeah,
nice
I
guy.
forget. They
Um,
made a documentary about him, about how they allegedly cured
Tourette's, yeah.
his Tourette's, but it's, again, this is conversational hypnotism, meaning you can't even consent
Maybe he's
to
hypnotizing me
being
is why he's so likable.
you can't really consent to being hypnotized against your will, conversationally, right? Stage hypnotists, they use physical inductions usually.
Mhm.
99% of the time they'll say, and now sleep, and they'll touch
Yeah.
your head or your shoulder and they'll kind of pull you into the state.
You're voluntarily giving it to them, but I didn't know they had I've never heard of this. But yeah.
Neurolinguistic programming is touchless hypnotism. It's not technically hypnotism, although it's very close to it. But that's what it is. It's conversational hypnotism. These people were experts in it, and with they pressured this guy Guma Aguiar to convert to Judaism. I it seems that they use neuro-linguistic programming to heavily suggest that he convert to Judaism. Again, these this is like it's still like an unsolved mystery. So
Mhm.
people should look into this, and we kind of need to be a little bit careful about making claims, because this guy disappeared eventually, and
Yeah.
his death has not been explained since. But Guma Aguiar, they didn't just stop with converting him to Judaism. Okay, he publicly converted to Orthodox Judaism. He's wearing the yarmulke and all this stuff, and he's surrounding himself with rabbis and all these people all day long. Okay, we call this the zeal of a convert, right? It's like when you convert to something, you're often more passionate about it than the people who've been
Yes.
doing it for years. Um, you see that in politics too. People go
Mhm.
from Trump to anti-Trump or vice versa, or whatever.
Yeah.
And basically, this guy, with all these people surrounding him, they start. We don't know what exactly was said, but they start pressuring him, talking up his ego, maybe even entertaining some of his fantasies. Well,
Mhm.
Jake, somewhere along the line, okay, this guy goes from a multimillionaire, billionaire,
Mhm.
to, in a matter of less than a year, believing that he is the Jewish Messiah. Okay. 2 years ago, he wasn't even Jewish.
Not
He was
even Jewish, now he's the
Catholic,
Jewish Messiah.
businessman. Now he's the Jewish Messiah. Okay. Now, whether that was like some virus or some mental illness that came in because of the neuro-linguistic programming or what, everyone around him, all these rabbis and people around him, started enabling him and gaslighting him and saying,
Mhm.
"Yeah, we think you're onto something. Oh, by the way, would you donate, since you're the Jewish Messiah, would you
Give
donate
me
$1 million
$2 billion.
to my?" Now, Jake, I'm not even kidding. There's documentaries and documentaries made about this guy. He was the laughing stock of Israel. Some streets really really like him. He was almost like a Pablo Escobar figure. Like he'd walk
Well,
down
yeah,
the
he's
street.
giving him millions of dollars. I'm sure some of the people did like him.
He'd walk down the street with a wad of money, handing it out to all the kids. They'd be chanting his name. They'd sing, "Oh, Guma, Guma, we love you, we love you." He's telling himself he's the Messiah. He's here to save Israel. He's here to, defeat Hamas, defeat all this stuff. And all he is he's a cash cow. And
Yeah.
they're milking him, milking him, milking him. He buys a soccer team in
Oh
Israel.
my god.
He's funding all these clubs, businesses, buildings, uh, synagogues. He's getting milked dry from every corner. He's fully mentally, He's like mentally handicapped at this point. Like
Yeah.
he cannot think clearly, but he has no one around him looking out for his interests. He's fully been handed over to this group
Everyone
of
around us is Jewish.
businessmen
Yeah.
who now have full, control over him. He did have a family back home, here in South Florida, in Hollywood,
Mhm.
Florida, or near Hollywood. He went missing in Hollywood. Uh, One day, his wife files for divorce. Okay, or is
Mhm.
expected to file for divorce, and he got wind he's about to get divorced. He goes home after, who knows how much money he had left, probably none. He goes back home after getting milked dry, and then gets on his boat. No shoes. He leaves his
Mhm.
shoes. Okay, no sandals. That's not that uncommon. He
Yeah.
doesn't, if I'm not mistaken, he doesn't take his keys or his wallet. He gets on his boat, his fishing boat, small boat, sails it out down the canal out to the ocean, and drives it out into the ocean. And then the GPS just shuts off on the boat, and the tracking stops, and the boat's just dead. The boat slowly drifts back to the beach. It gets beached. Someone reports it. They come, they find an empty boat. Guma
That's
Aguiar disappeared after
completely
being
on.
convinced, or convincing himself, that he was the Jewish Messiah. He disappears off the coast of Florida, milked dry. Okay.
Yeah.
They waited for the absolute minimum amount of time to confirm him as dead. So there was all these mysteries, all these question marks about what the heck was this, a suicide? Can't you kill yourself some other way besides that? Jumping off
Yeah,
a boat
it's
into the
not
middle of
like
the
he
ocean.
killed himself that way, I don't think. That's kind of bizarre way to kill yourself. Sounds like Robert Maxwell, didn't he
Yeah.
drowned off his yacht?
And we see him getting on his boat. He's on his
Mm.
security camera,
So he definitely was on the boat.
pacing. He's pacing back and forth. He gets on his boat. He didn't bring weights with him. He didn't bring chains with him. He didn't bring a.
Yeah.
So what? He just jumped into the ocean and drowned and never showed up
Yeah,
anywhere
I would say
else.
most likely he was murdered. Obviously, he's crazy, so you could argue that, he went overboard, but it sounds like kill him, but if they already took all of his money, not sure why, maybe he knew too much or knew some things he wasn't supposed to.
Well, lots of questions that we'll never really have the answer to, but that is a dark chapter in Florida history that's never been explained. No
How
one's
recent was
ever.
that? Like,
It was like
fairly recently?
2012. It's like 2012.
Yeah.
Like when I was a kid in like middle school or something had happened.
It literally was a
Right.
billionaire. Like, that's like a lot of money to get,
Yeah.
jacked from him.
Hundreds and hundreds of millions. I think he was a
Yeah.
billionaire. Um,
But you
but
could see you're surrounded, like, almost to a degree, it almost feels like Trump surrounded by all these people telling him, like, he's like acts like a Jewish messiah now.
as much as I love Donald Trump, I think you might be onto something there. So
Mhm.
yeah.
That's kinda how it feels, like he's surrounded himself by these people that are kinda telling him, like, "You're this, you're the most loved people by the Jews, period. You're like the non-Jewish Jewish Messiah." Was it Cyrus?
Yep.
I think was like the non-Jewish
Yep.
Jewish Messiah. That's
He's got
like
that Cyrus syndrome.
mhm. That's what it feels like. He says, I have 95% approval rating in Israel." Yeah, but you're not the president of
Yeah.
Israel.
Well, one more another thing we can cover real quick is you know, the last episode largely revolved
Mhm.
around the question, how did so many Jews end up in Florida? And that took us from Columbus to the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean to the Jews behind the Confederacy in the Civil War.
Yeah, it was
Well,
I people listen to that haven't listened to that, I recommend you listen to it. Some fascinating, parts.
yeah. Well, New York, I'm not from New York, but because of the story, it's pretty much the same exact story. The book that we sell, The Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean, that I talked about last time. There's also another book that I should mention that is not where I get any of this information, but it pretty much agrees with a lot of it. Have you ever heard of the famous Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal or Wiesenthal?
I've heard the name, but don't really know hardly anything about him.
So Simon Wiesenthal, they've made multiple movies about him. He was like a Nazi hunter, so almost like a Mossad agent. After the
Yeah.
war, he goes around hunting the old
Mhm.
ex-Nazis and bringing them to justice, whatever. Well, that same guy, he wrote a book called Sails of Hope. Okay. This is way before anyone could prove Columbus was Jewish.
Yeah.
He wrote a book saying Columbus, everything like we said on the last episode, Columbus was looking for the Garden of Eden, looking to make America a new Jewish Holy Land. He struck a deal with the King and Queen of Spain to get all the Jews out, get all the rich Jews out, in a nice, easy, comfortable way. And that's like the world's number one Nazi hunter telling you himself that Columbus was Jewish and he had this grand plan to make America Jewish, and kind of like we said, making the case that almost America is Jewish from day one.
Interesting. And a lot of the
And there's
founding fathers and stuff are Masons, like George Washington, the way DC is laid out. And not that's 100% Jewish, but it's
yeah,
largely Jewish.
well, yeah, DC, comes up. DC is not that old. It was a swamp.
Mhm.
It was a swamp until like the revolution. But a city that we should really talk about, New York City. Okay. When we think of Jews in the world, there's Israel, there's South
Mhm.
Florida, and then there's New
New
York City.
York,
Los Angeles, eh, they're
not near as
certainly
extreme as New York.
exactly, they're influential in Los Angeles, but
Yeah.
the true Jewish religion is not as baked in to Los
Mhm.
Angeles as it is New York and South Florida. Also, there's a lot more in South Florida and New York than Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken. So we explained last episode how the Jews were kicked out of Spain. They went to Morocco, went to the Caribbean,
Mhm.
and many of them just kind of wandered from the Caribbean into the southern United States and opened those plantations and stuff. Well, where did the other half of the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean go? They went to New York. New York. New York was
Mhm.
not founded, but built up, reinvigorated by an injection of Jewish pirates from the Caribbean who
Literally
became
pirates.
legitimate businessmen when they settled in New York. Now,
Interesting.
some people say, "Oh, the Dutch settled New York." No, no, no. It was New Amsterdam. It had nothing to do with the Jews.
Mhm.
Who was instrumental in setting up Amsterdam? Have There's a family called the Palash family. Palash. They were another one of those Jewish pirate families who were very, very influential. So in Italy, they're called the Palazzo, like palace family,
Mhm.
like of the palace, like they, court Jews, like they're royal or palatial. So, but in other languages, Palash, Palach, um, that is this family that many advisors to the King of Spain, Portugal, Morocco, the sultans, the
Mhm.
Palash family was advising many of these royal families. Eventually, the Palash family become the lead pirates in the Pirates of the Caribbean, and they're rabbis. They're rabbi pirate ship
So the
captains.
rabbis were literally pirates.
I'm not even kidding.
It's like running a porn site.
They would name their ships Moses, all these different Shoshana, all these different Hebrew names. And yeah, people need to go get the book, Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean.
I had to look this up.
So
It's crazy you never hear about this. This should be a movie, but Hollywood doesn't make it for some reason. It's Jewish
half of
rabbi
them
pirates.
half of them go to the Southeast United States. The other half go in part to New York, but many of them go to Amsterdam first. So when we hear about the Dutch,
Mhm.
uh, trading
Yeah.
companies, East Indies, West Indies trading companies, when people hear Dutch, they think of like uh, German, like
Mhm.
Belgium, like French, Danish.
Yeah.
No, 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 guys. These are the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean
Mhm.
rebranding, rebranding in, like the North Atlantic Ocean. And many of those Jewish pirates went and settled in Amsterdam, okay, and became the Dutch, what we call Dutch today. So
Mhm.
when the Dutch come and found New York, it's almost like we're saying it's like double Jewish because the
Yeah.
Dutch were very Jewish themselves, and very tolerant of Jews, especially.
Mhm.
But also, then there were actual Jewish pirates who went straight to New York
Yeah.
and became rich, influential
So
leaders.
they're from Dutch, but they were Jews from Dutch or from
Yeah,
Amsterdam. Or
yeah, the Netherlands, Amsterdam. Um, so New York, we can tie into the whole thing we were talking about last episode. It's pretty much the same story for the origin of New York, and people should really look up the Palach family. Samuel
lots.
Palach, Judah Palach, Pallache. They were rabbis, chief rabbis. They were in Spain, Morocco, the Caribbean, Netherlands, Turkey.
Mhm.
Um, very, very influential family. And a couple ended up in New York too. But
Sephardic Jews, probably.
yes, yeah, they're Sephardic. Totally.
So real Jews. Just kidding. That's the whole argument over real Jews versus not Jews. Doesn't make any sense. And
Well,
New
that's enough.
York comes that's Wall Street was like the first place they put, which obviously turned into our financial capital.
Yeah. Well, we touched on it last time, but at the end of the day, Europeans are going to have to wake up to the fact that they are the lost tribes of Israel. So the Native American thing, that's just like a cool little side story. What's
Mhm.
really important is how did Europe end up so Christian? How did
Mhm.
America end up so Christian? The Europeans who received Christianity early on were probably the lost tribes who split off from Israel and the Judahites way back then. So, last episode, we joked about, uh, you know, the Shields family. You're probably descended from some of these ancient lost Israelites
Yeah.
who made
And my name's Jacob.
there you go.
Skills,
So,
jujitsu. It's not looking good.
I really like to promote the King James Bible. So that's like the best English Bible. If you want to learn Hebrew and
Mhm.
Greek, whatever, cool, go learn it. But as far as English, we got to use the King James Bible. It's the only
Why
King.
why is that one better?
So it's better. I think it's objectively better. It's the best English translation of the
Mhm.
Bible. It's a direct translation from Hebrew into English, and then the
Mhm.
Greek or maybe some Aramaic into English. There's no game of telephone. So most of the other English Bibles are
Mhm.
a game of telephone. The King James is as direct as you can get, and it did not. This is sometimes people don't like this, but I think it's a strength. It did not use the Septuagint as its reference. So many early Christians, or not early Christians, but early versions of the Bible, they would stick to the Greek and they would try to ignore the Hebrew because they were a little bit allergic to the Hebrew. They didn't want to be too close to the Jews, so they went more with what
Mhm.
the Greek interpretation. But the King James Bible, it is a superior translation. It captures the essence of the Bible, but above all, it is the only Bible made from the point of view that the Northern European people
Mhm.
are the real Israelites. King James himself, much like some other people in history, is so lied about and maligned by people today. They say, "Oh, he was
Mhm.
gay. He was, he had one ball. He was secretly Jewish." Where else do we hear this
Yeah.
about certain people who stand up to the system? Oh,
Mhm.
he killed his mom. He was evil. He was gay. Whatever. Well, King James believed he, as the king of Ireland, England, and Scotland, was the true king of Israel because he believed the Israelites directly emigrated to Northern Europe, and voila, that's where he came from. There was no mistake. He was not confused about that.
Mhm.
Today, we're confused. British Israelism was a huge movement until maybe this is what we'll finish it off with is
Yeah.
because it ties us back to
Mhm.
Zionism. Um, Many British people, Celtic British people, fully believed wholeheartedly that they were descended from the Israelites in the Old Testament, that they were closely related to Jesus's bloodline. Um, through the lost tribes. Now, another part of this, uh, are you familiar with how Palestine and Gaza and all that fell into the hands of modern day Israel? Essentially, how they did it was they used the British to get it
Yeah.
for.
The Balfour Declaration and the partitioning and all that, or
Now, British Israelism was promoted, openly promoted, and celebrated in Britain until World War One.
Mhm.
So there was, if you've ever heard of Lawrence of Arabia,
Yeah.
Lawrence of Arabia, one of my greatest, heroes from history.
Mhm.
He was a vegetarian as well, so
Oh,
great
I didn't
war
know that.
hero, war fighter. Yep, vegetarian genius. Warrior,
Mhm.
poet, philosopher. He was a young guy who was sent into a daring mission in the Middle East to convince the Arabians, the princes of Arabia, to rebel against the Ottomans and
Mhm.
support the British and the French against the Germans and the Ottomans,
Mhm.
because the Ottomans controlled all of the Middle East back then,
Yeah.
up until World War One. So Lawrence of Arabia, who's world famous for his exploits, his courage, and his charisma. Um, he was almost like a religious leader too.
Mhm.
It's a fascinating guy. Lawrence of Arabia almost single-handedly overthrew the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East with the help of the Arabs.
Yeah.
He got the Arabs to rise up
Mhm.
against the Ottomans, kick them out. So as he was conquering, first through guerrilla warfare, he's taking over parts of the Middle East with this big Arab army behind him. Very, very few British soldiers, involved. But the British are funding the Arabs. Okay, this is how we get much of the conflict in the Middle East today.
Yeah.
Is picking up the pieces of this mess. Um,
Mhm.
the rulers of Saudi Arabia were hand selected by the British and the French in order to be good proxy rulers.
Exactly. That's why they work so well with the US and Israel.
Exactly. And unfortunately, Lawrence, who I think was a great man, a great hero, was unfortunately the catalyst, the man that this
Mhm.
all kind of came to a head with. Um, Lawrence, with this army of Arabs. You know where the Palestine flag comes from? The
No,
flag of
where?
Palestine is the flag of this movement that Lawrence and the Arab Spring, the Arab Revolt
Mhm.
had with them, and they brought that flag into Palestine. So this it was like a brotherhood, or almost like a coalition, to go
Mhm.
kick out the Ottomans. The Ottomans were bad. They were Muslims treating the native Muslims bad.
Mhm.
So everyone thought, all right, let's get rid of the bad Muslims. We're going to have good Muslims, Jews,
And then we'll be
Christians.
free.
Everyone's going to be happy. Um, so they're fighting to kick out the Ottomans, and almost on the eve of this very important battle to retake Jerusalem and take it from the Ottomans and give it to the Arabs, but also the British, are going to have
Mhm.
control over Jerusalem because of this. Lawrence's General Allenby, was summoned to a secret meeting. Okay, this is documented in multiple
Mhm.
books. People who were there was summoned to a secret meeting. Some of the people in the room were Freemasons. Some of the people were members of other ancient orders. And General Allenby, who was like Lawrence of Arabia's boss, was told, "Hey, General Allenby, something very important is going on. And tomorrow or this week, when you go to take Jerusalem, you can't fuck up. Okay. We need you to get this
Mhm.
right, because this is biblical prophecy
Yep.
being acted out." And basically, these people who had been preserving this information, this intelligence operation, they told
Mhm.
General Allenby, uh, the British are the real Israelites. And us moving into Jerusalem
Mhm.
is the regathering of all the lost tribes. We're bringing all the forces of good back to Jerusalem. And you're the man that's going to help do it. You and Lawrence. And we're going to make you some of the greatest heroes the world has ever known. Kind of like the Cyrus
Yeah,
syndrome, almost a little bit.
exactly.
And saying, you are the British Israelites, and you are here to help the Judahites, the Jewish people, reconquer their land, to help these poor,
Mhm.
poor people reconquer their country.
Mhm.
So they fuel up, they get this morale, this like vigor, this excitement, like, oh my God, we're the real Israelites. Like, man, this is all divine. This is why we've been
Mhm.
so successful. It start going to everyone's heads. Uh, General Allenby says, oh my God, all right, well, full steam ahead. Let's go get Jerusalem. From that moment on, and by the way, they take Jerusalem. It's over pretty quick. You know, the British then take over. They told the Arabs, "You guys are going to get this place for yourselves." But then the British seize
Yeah.
control. The French bring in their influence too, and it becomes a proxy state for the British. And
Mhm.
then World War II, Germany's making it a move on the Holy Land as well.
Mhm.
But basically, after the prize had been achieved, we never hear a single word about British Israelism in the mainstream.
It's
It
so
goes
interesting.
it gets
Just
flushed
disappeared.
right down the toilet. It served their purpose for the time, and therefore they promoted it. And then once they got their goal, once Jerusalem
Mhm.
is captured, well, we're all still Israelites, right? You just
Yeah.
convinced the British military that they're part of Israel. Oh no, sorry, yeah.
No, no, that got way
Tribe
down.
of tribe of Judah only. So
Mm.
that's why Jew becomes a distinction from Israelite,
Mhm.
and only the Jews get Jerusalem. So
Interesting.
British Israelism, as much as I believe in that, I believe it's fact, it was discarded after the British.
It was
Uh,
used to manipulate, then thrown away as soon as they had something interesting.
and something similar might be happening with Trump and America right now. So
Yeah,
watch
and
that.
a few other things, but they're probably too complex right now because we're about to wrap. Yeah, the Federal Reserve, that's way too complex. The founding or the funding of the U.S. Well, here's one we can maybe answer like in 5 minutes, just real quick. This actually could be complex too. The slave trade and how there were so many or there was black slave owners and Native American slave owners. That might be a little
Oh yeah.
complex too, but I thought that was pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, yeah. So that's, again, we don't want to just target one group and say they're the source of all
Mhm.
mankind's misery or whatever. That's not my message here at all. In
No,
fact, who the real Illuminati are, who the real New World Order is, who the real problem is. There's seven
yeah,
families, seven bloodlines that have always ran the world. Always. It's not 13. It's not
really
Rothschilds, Rockefellers. It's above that. Even
7.
above that. These
Which
families
7?
never even heard of. You would never guess it. They're richer, more influential, more evil, more crushing. They actually get their hands
Mhm.
into your lives more than these others. The seven families that are the source of all the world's misery, and the Jews, they suffer too. The source of everyone's misery: gluttony,
Mhm.
lust, wrath, envy. You know, what are the other ones I'm forgetting? Uh,
Yeah, pride,
Vanity, pride.
envy.
Yeah, the seven deadly sins are the real enemy.
Oh, yeah,
Don't
that's
don't make any enemy out there besides yourself. Okay, all the if we're gonna blame the Jews for pornography,
yeah,
what is
it's
that?
true because if
It's
you're
just milking.
yeah,
It's
or
milking
money,
that.
usually you're the one that wants the money. So that is true. Like obviously, there's some
Yeah,
things you could blame them for, but you have to blame your own self as well. 100%. Man, I agree. It gets complicated. Of course, I don't think someone should push this stuff either, but it is. You can't just blame someone else when if you're the one consuming a product or whatnot.
yeah. But
But
you asked. What was the question again?
we could
Oh,
just
the
do a
slavery,
very,
slavery.
just a
Yes.
very quick version of it. We can go more in depth because there's other things I could talk about, but we're already over like 2 hours. Also, I would love to maybe I don't know how versed you are in Freemasonry. I just started looking into that, not today, but I realized all these secret societies and Freemasons, they really did shape all these big historic events. I didn't realize I always
Yes.
kind of just tuned out when people started talking about it. And I started looking, I'm like, whoa, I haven't done that much
Well,
research yet, but I think
remember,
maybe
okay,
a
Jake, that's such a good point because remember I'm talking about this British Israelism thing and how they
Mhm.
used it to push Zionism, to achieve Zionism. Like that was what actually got them Jerusalem and in Israel.
Mhm.
Well, the glue that bonded those two movements was
Mhm.
Freemasonry. Where does
Yeah.
Freemasonry come from? The British Isles, Scotland,
Mhm.
England, Ireland. That's where Freemasonry got started and became influential. And all the Freemasons in America were Freemasons because they came from those places. The
Yeah.
the Italians weren't like Freemasons. It was the British, the
Mhm.
Scottish, the Irish, and
Washington was.
so in that regard, Freemasonry is like Diet Judaism or Judaism for the
Mhm.
goys. It's certain elements of it, but again, we talked about this last time a little bit. The whole point of Freemasonry is building this allegorical temple, and but that's been twisted into building the next temple because they're all
Yeah.
about Solomon and building the temple and the architecture, and so that's been pushed and construed into
Mhm.
building the real temple. Like they're trying to get Masons
Yeah.
to support the building of the real temple, not just
Mhm.
figuratively. But the slavery thing about black slaves, just this kind of ties into it too. Is the Irish have always been a
Mhm.
thorn in the side of Zionism? This
Mhm.
global power structure, whatever. You talk, I see you talk to people like Ken O'Keefe and
Yeah.
lots of great Irish resistance
Mhm.
fighters to the Zionist
He's over in
oppression.
Iran right now, which is a little
Yeah,
crazy, but he's a
I saw that.
little wild.
Now, basically, the Irish have always been a thorn in the side, and some of the first slaves in America were Irish. Um, some of the first black slaves in America were indentured servants who only had
Mhm.
a 7-year term. And after serving that 7 years, some black men in Jamestown actually got awarded land, acres and acres of land. If you finish your 7 years of slavery, black men in
Mhm.
Jamestown were getting gifted acres and acres of land. They would turn around right away and get their own black slaves.
Mhm.
And once slavery started becoming real profitable and people started getting their own freedom and turning around and buying more slaves, they started wanting to uh, keep them on a permanent basis. Screw the
Mhm.
7-year thing. Let's just make them uh, live in
Keep him
slavery
forever.
forever. So that happened to Irish people too, though.
Mhm.
So blacks own slaves, Irish own slaves. Now here in America, in Florida, the Kingsley Plantation was one of the largest slave owners in Florida. That was ran by an African princess. So an
Wow.
African
think
woman.
I think first slave owner in America was black. I believe it looks up right now to make sure that's right because I heard that before,
One,
but you never hear things that aren't correct.
yeah, well, one of the earliest. So there's this guy. 100 poor English children were sent in 1619 to Jamestown as just orphans for free. If you need them, use them. If you need a kid, take one. If you're gonna make them work for the rest of their life, okay, whatever. Now that was before black slaves ever made it to America. Of the 20 original black slaves who uh, who went to Jamestown,
Mhm.
multiple of them earned their own freedom, owned land, and eventually owned slaves. So, like, of the first 20 black people in America, multiple of them were black slave owners themselves.
That's
Now,
wild.
if you trace that all the way to the American Civil War, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of black slave owners. Some of them had over 100 slaves. Some of them had, hundreds. Elizabeth, Anthony Johnson was a
Was he one of the ones that was
black
one of the
slave
first
owner.
maybe? I know, yeah.
Yeah,
So it doesn't make it okay, but it just changes the whole way it's taught. Like the way it's presented
exactly,
to us versus reality totally turns it upside down. And
exactly. And
obviously
this is
black people were more of them, they were the last ones, but it certainly does change how history is taught.
100%. And the Irish and Italian weren't considered blacks, weren't considered white until World War II. You,
Yeah,
you
so
know,
interesting.
so but all right, John C. Stanley, William
Mhm.
Ellison, he had over 200 slaves. William Ellison
Wow.
Jr. Anna
And he was a black
Kingsley.
guy.
Anna Kingsley was the one in Florida. And then also real quick, we brought up the Seminoles. The last people in America to have a black slave were the Seminole Indians
Wow.
because they weren't subject to the laws of
So you're
America.
part of it. Oh, because they have different rules and the rest of it,
Yeah,
just like they have gambling. So they're
they
just like,
said
yeah, we
we've
don't
got.
have to follow that.
They said, well, yeah, we've got slaves and we're going to keep them. So they had a slave. They had
Jewish
slaves up
Indian,
until 1920.
allegedly. Really?
1920. Yeah,
Oh
they
my
had
God, that's
they had
crazy.
photographs. I've got a
That
photograph of a black slave on my screen right now
so
from
you think that should
19.
be taught in history that there was slavery in America till 1920, but I guess it doesn't fit into the narrative.
Well, it was Native Americans doing it, so
Mm. You
that's not
still that's
really.
yeah, because they have to follow national law, but not or it's state law, but not national law. You think national law that would apply, but apparently not.
Now,
Well,
I like Seminole Indians. I'm not trying to talk bad about them. I'm friends with a lot of Seminole Indians, but yeah, well, yeah,
they know
man.
how to make that money. Everyone's got to have a good Seminole Indian friend. I'm gonna get an accountant, a lawyer that's a Seminole. Now I know what Indians to
Here's
mess with.
here's the last slam dunk on Seminoles being Jewish. Guess where they're
Mhm.
headquartered? Guess what city they're headquartered in?
New York or Florida somewhere.
Hollywood, Florida.
Hollywood, Florida. Is that like the
So
really Jewish
Hollywood.
place?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, because
But
I know that whole area is Jewish, but Hollywood's
so
like
it's like
particularly Jewish.
in California, the Jews run Hollywood, and in Florida, the
Yeah,
Seminoles
Florida.
run Hollywood.
So the Jews.
A little bit, kind of.
Well, anyways, hey, thanks for coming on. Where can people find you? I know you have your YouTube channel. What's Old World Florida, right?
Yeah, Jake, thanks for having
Tons
me,
of great
dude.
stuff on there.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Always a good time. Old World Florida is my YouTube channel. Instagram, Rumble, it's all the same. Old World Florida, you'll find me.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff we didn't get in today. So hopefully, again, hit some of the banking, the Federal Reserve, maybe some of the Freemasons. I don't know how up on that you are, but that's all stuff I've been looking into, trying to understand better. So
Federal Reserve would be a great topic if that's a big
yeah,
long
that's like a full episode almost, especially if you tie in some other banking stuff. So yeah, maybe in a few months, if we have time, something we should hit that because that's actually not many people really understand that, including myself properly. And I think I understand a little bit, and it doesn't really make any sense once you start understanding it. So
Yep, there's some black magic going on with that one.
exactly. Well, they found basically what they're always looking for what the gold, what do they call it? The thing that could print gold out of what was it called? Alchemy.
Yeah, like the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah, they found alchemy basically. They could just print money out of thin air.
Oh yeah.
But anyways,
Yeah, man.
Dr. Longo, thanks so much. Hopefully I'll talk to you soon. As many of you know, I have many controversial guests, so that comes at a cost of being demonetized everywhere. So if you want to support the program, go to fightbackpodcast.com, and I have all kinds of merch on there, whether it's jiu-jitsu, fighting, political, and other accessories. And thanks for the support.